Welcome to SleepHive. Adjust your volume, close your eyes, and let my voice guide you through timeless fables filled with wonder and wisdom. Now, settle in. Our journey begins. The Thief and the House Dog. Late in the night, when the stars blinked lazily in the sky and the village lay wrapped in silence, a shadow crept along the narrow street. It moved slowly, cautiously, slinking against the stone walls of houses like a snake in the grass. The shadow belonged to a thief, a man who lived in darkness and trickery, always looking for an easy prize. That night he had set his sights on a grand house at the end of the lane. It was a large home with sturdy wooden doors and windows tightly shut against the cold. The thief had watched this house for days, waiting, planning. He knew the family inside was wealthy. There would be gold, silver, and treasures hidden away, just waiting for someone clever enough to take them. But there was one problem. The dog. A great, strong house dog guarded the home. He was no ordinary pet, no lazy creature who slept while strangers prowled about. No, this dog was loyal, fierce, and sharp-eyed. Every night he kept watch, his ears pricked for the faintest sound, his nose sniffing for anything unusual. If anything or anyone came too close, he would bark. A deep, thunderous bark that could wake the whole household. The thief knew that if he tried to break in, the dog would raise the alarm, and his plan would fail before it even began. But the thief was a cunning man, and he had come prepared. Hidden in his bag were thick slices of fresh meat, red and glistening, still dripping with the scent of something irresistible. The thief grinned to himself. Even the bravest guard will lower his defences for a tasty reward, he whispered. Carefully, he reached over the fence and tossed a piece of meat onto the ground near the dog. The meat landed with a soft plop, and the rich scent filled the air. The dog lifted his head, sniffing. His dark eyes narrowed. The thief smiled to himself. Yes, that's right, he murmured under his breath. Eat, enjoy, forget your duties for just a moment. But the dog did not move. He stared at the meat, then slowly raised his gaze to the thief. The thief hesitated. Something was wrong. Then the dog spoke. You must take me for a fool, the dog growled, his voice deep and firm. His tail did not wag. His ears did not relax. His sharp teeth gleamed in the moonlight. The thief blinked in surprise. He had expected the dog to eat, to be distracted, maybe even to fall asleep after a full belly. But instead, the animal was staring at him with more suspicion than before. If you think, the dog continued, that I will lower my guard because you have suddenly decided to be generous, you are very much mistaken. The thief's fingers twitched. Come now, friend, he said, forcing a smile. It is just a small gift, a token of friendship. The dog let out a low chuckle, a sound far more threatening than a growl. A gift, he repeated. You expect me to believe that? In all the years I have guarded this house, never once has food fallen from the sky into my waiting mouth. My master feeds me every morning at the same time with his own hands. This ? This is not kindness. This is trickery. The thief took a slow step backward, but the dog rose to his feet. His muscles tensed, his paws pressed firmly against the ground. His eyes gleamed with understanding. I know your kind, the dog said. You do not come offering gifts unless you want something in return. You do not throw meat to a watchful guard unless you hope to silence him. You do not try to befriend me in the dead of night unless your intentions are as dark as the sky above us." The thief swallowed hard. The plan was unraveling. "You call this a gift," the dog continued, his voice rising, "but I call it a bribe. And he who offers bribes needs watching, for his heart is never honest." With that, the dog threw back his head and let out a mighty bark, so loud, so powerful, that it rang through the house like a thunderclap. The windows shuddered, the air trembled, lights flared to life inside. Voices called out. The sound of hurried footsteps rushed toward the door. The thief panicked. He turned on his heel and ran, leaping over fences, sprinting through the empty streets, vanishing into the night before the door could even open. The dog stood tall, watching the thief disappear, his tail wagging just once in triumph. A moment later, the master of the house stepped outside, holding a lantern high. His eyes darted around, searching for trouble. But there was nothing left, only the half-eaten piece of meat lying in the dirt. The man looked down at his faithful dog, his face softening. "Good boy," he murmured, kneeling to pat his head. "You have done well tonight." The dog accepted the praise, his heart swelling with pride. He had not been fooled. He had not been tempted. He had stood his ground, and in doing so, he had kept his home safe. And as the household returned to sleep, the dog settled back into his place, eyes still watching, ears still listening, his heart as loyal as ever. The night was silent once more, but the lesson remained. The thief and the house dog teaches us that those who offer bribes often have dishonest intentions. True loyalty and integrity cannot be bought with gifts, no matter how tempting they may be. It is important to stay watchful, for not all kindness is genuine, and those who seek to deceive often hide their true motives behind sweet words and false generosity. The Mice in Council. Deep beneath the floorboards of an old farmhouse, a bustling colony of mice lived in secret. They darted through the shadows, scurrying along the wooden beams and through tiny holes in the walls. To them, the house was a world of wonders, a land filled with fallen crumbs, sacks of grain, and delicious cheese that sometimes went missing from the pantry. Life was good, or at least it could have been, if not for one terrible problem. The cat, the great enemy of all mice, a fierce, silent hunter, always lurking in the darkness. She was as fast as lightning and as quiet as a whisper. No mouse ever saw her coming, only a flicker of green eyes before pounce. A scream, a struggle, and another mouse was gone. The mice were terrified. They lived in constant fear, never knowing when the cat would strike. Something had to be done. So, one evening, deep in the hidden corners of the house, the mice gathered in council. It was a rare event, for mice were not the kind to sit still for long. But tonight was different. Tonight they would solve the greatest problem their colony had ever faced. At the center of the gathering stood the oldest and wisest of the mice, a grey-furred elder with a scar on his tail, a mark left by a near escape from the cat long ago. He cleared his throat, and the chatter of the mice fell silent. "My friends," he began, his voice grave, "we cannot go on like this. Every day One of us disappears. Every night we tremble in fear. We need a plan, something that will warn us of the cat's approach before it is too late." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. "We must find a way to know when the cat is coming," another mouse added. "But how?" squeaked a young mouse from the back. The mice began to chatter again, throwing out ideas, each one wilder than the last. "We could build a wall," suggested one. "We could make a trap," said another. None of these ideas seemed to work. The cat was too clever, too quick, and too dangerous. Then from the crowd, a young bright-eyed mouse with soft brown fur stepped forward. He had always been known for his clever mind, and tonight he had an idea. "I have it!" he declared, his voice rising above the noise. "We should tie a bell around the cat's neck." The mice gasped. "With a bell!" the young mouse continued excitedly. "We will hear her coming before she gets close. The moment we hear the bell, we can run and hide before she can catch us." The room erupted in squeaks of excitement. "It's brilliant! It's perfect! No more surprises! We'll always know where she is." Even the wise old mouse nodded in approval. "A fine idea indeed," he said. "If we can hear the cat before she sees us, we will finally have the advantage." The mice cheered, celebrating the young mouse's cleverness. The fear that had weighed on their tiny hearts seemed to lift. At last they had a solution. But then the old mouse slowly raised a paw. "One question remains," he said, and the room grew silent again. "Who among us will bell the cat?" The mice looked at each other. Their excitement faded. For a long moment no one spoke. The idea was brilliant, yes, but now they had to face a terrifying truth. Someone would have to get close to the cat. Someone would have to sneak up to her, loop the bell around her neck, and somehow escape without being caught. A nervous chuckle came from the crowd. "Well, perhaps someone strong should do it," a mouse suggested. "Or maybe someone fast," another added. "Or someone very, very quiet." All eyes turned to the young mouse who had come up with the idea. His ears twitched, and he took a step back. "Well, I mean, I just thought of the plan," he stammered. "That doesn't mean I should do it." The wise old mouse looked around the room. "Does anyone volunteer?" Silence. Not a single mouse stepped forward. One by one, they each made excuses. "I have little ones to care for," said one. "My legs are too slow," said another. "I am far too old," muttered a grey-furred elder. The young mouse who had proposed the idea shuffled his paws. "It's a good plan," he said, his voice quieter now. "But maybe there's another way." The wise old mouse sighed. He had seen this before. Big ideas, clever words. But when the time came for action, no one wanted to take the risk. Slowly, he stepped forward. "My friends," he said, his voice calm but firm, "a plan is only as good as the one willing to carry it out. If none of us are brave enough to bell the cat, then the plan is worth nothing at all." The mice lowered their heads, tails drooping. The excitement of the idea had faded, leaving only the cold reality behind. That night, the mice returned to their hiding places, still fearful, still helpless against the silent hunter that lurked in the darkness. The cat still ruled the house, and the mice, despite all their grand ideas, had done nothing to change their fate. The bell remained just an idea, one that could never work without someone willing to act. The Mice in Council teaches us that ideas alone are not enough. Someone must have the courage to act. It is easy to suggest plans and solutions, but unless someone is willing to carry them out, they remain just words. True leadership is not just about speaking up, but about stepping forward and doing what must be done. Let those who propose be willing to perform. The Bald Knight. The morning sun stretched its golden rays across the rolling countryside, casting a warm glow over the fields. The air was crisp and filled with the chirping of birds as a group of noble knights prepared for a grand hunt. They stood tall in their shining armour, their horses restless with excitement, their hunting dogs sniffing eagerly at the fresh scent of the wild. Among them was a particular knight, known for his wisdom, skill with the sword, and his impeccable appearance. He carried himself with pride, his posture straight, his attire spotless. But there was one thing he did not wish to be known for. He was bald. The knight had long since lost his once thick locks of hair, and though he was a man of great strength and courage, he could not bear the thought of appearing anything less than youthful and commanding. So, every morning, before he put on his armour, before he fastened his sword to his side, he carefully placed upon his head a fine wig made of thick, flowing hair. To anyone looking at him, he appeared as regal and strong as ever, his secret hidden beneath the illusion of youth. On this particular day, as the knights gathered for the hunt, the bald knight adjusted his wig carefully beneath his hat, ensuring it was firmly in place. With a confident smile, he mounted his mighty horse, eager to prove his skill. The horn sounded, echoing through the fields, and the hunt began. The knights charged forward, their horses galloping through the tall grass. The wind rushed against their faces, their capes flaring behind them. The bald knight rode with great energy, his heart pounding with excitement as he leaned forward, gripping the reins tightly. But then disaster struck. A sudden mighty gust of wind roared through the fields, rushing through the trees and sweeping over the riders. The bald knight felt his hat lift from his head. His eyes widened in horror as his hat flew off into the sky, and before he could react, his wig followed. For a moment, time seemed to slow. His beautiful flowing hair, the one thing that had kept his secret hidden, was gone, leaving behind his smooth, bald head, gleaming in the sunlight for all to see. The knights, one by one, turned to look. Then the laughter began. It started as a chuckle, then grew into a roar of amusement, echoing across the fields. Some knights nearly fell from their horses, clutching their stomachs, while others wiped away tears of laughter. "The mighty knight!" one of them gasped between laughs. "His hair flees faster than the prey we hunt." Another knight, still chuckling, added, "What marvel is this? A warrior so strong, yet bested by the wind." The bald knight blinked. His secret was no longer a secret. He had been exposed. But then something unexpected happened. Instead of shouting in anger, instead of riding away in shame, the bald knight did something no one expected. He laughed. A deep, hearty laugh, louder than all the others, filled the air as he held his sides shaking with amusement. "My friends," he called out, wiping a tear from his eye, "tell me, should I be surprised that hair which was never mine has abandoned me, when even my own hair left me long ago." The laughter doubled. The knights cheered at his wit, their laughter now one of camaraderie rather than mockery. The bald knight rode on, feeling lighter than he ever had before. For so long he had clung to something not truly his, fearing what others might think if they knew the truth. But now, with his secret gone and his pride unshaken, he felt freer than ever. That day he hunted well, rode fast, and laughed harder than any other knight. And though the wind had stolen his wig, it had also given him something greater, the courage to accept himself. The bold knight teaches us that those who cannot take care of their own should not be entrusted with the care of another's property. The knight, unable to keep even his own hair, had placed his trust in something false, and it failed him at the first sign of trouble. This reminds us that true strength comes not from illusions or borrowed pride, but from owning who we truly are. The bulls and the frogs. The sun hung low in the sky, casting golden light over a vast green meadow, where a great herd of bulls roamed freely. They were strong, powerful creatures, their muscles rippling beneath sleek coats as they grazed and moved across the land. The air was thick with the scent of trampled grass, and the occasional snort or stomp echoed across the field. But not all was peaceful in the herd. Two of the mightiest bulls, both bold and proud, had set their sights on leadership. Each one believed himself to be the strongest, the wisest, the most deserving to rule over the others. Their rivalry had simmered for weeks, angry stares across the pasture, horns clashing in brief, tense encounters. And now, at last, the battle had begun. With a mighty bellow, the first bull charged, his hooves pounding the earth like thunder. The second met him head-on, their massive bodies colliding with a force that shook the very ground. Dust rose into the air as they pushed against each other, their horns locking, their muscles straining. The other bulls stepped back, forming a wide circle around the combatants. Their eyes gleamed with anticipation, their breath heavy with excitement. Who would be the victor? Who would lead the herd? Down by the edge of the meadow, where the land sloped into a murky marsh, a small pond shimmered in the light of the setting sun. It was here that the frogs made their home. The pond was a world of its own, hidden beneath towering reeds and broad lily pads. The water was cool, the air was filled with the sound of croaking songs, and the tiny creatures hopped and splashed about without a care. All except for one. An old frog, his skin wrinkled and his eyes wise with many seasons, sat motionless on a rock at the edge of the water. His gaze was fixed on the meadow above, where the bulls clashed in their terrible struggle. His long throat swelled, but no song came from his lips, only a low, worried groan. A young frog, barely old enough to understand the ways of the world, noticed the elder's distress and hopped over. His bright eyes shone with curiosity. "Why do you groan so, grandfather?" the young frog asked. "Look at them. Such power, such strength. The bulls fight for the right to lead. But what does it matter to us? We are only frogs." The old frog turned his wise gaze upon the youngster. He did not smile. "Young one," he said, his voice steady, "do you not see what is coming?" The young frog blinked, confused. "Coming?" he echoed. "I see only the battle of the bulls. It is their fight, not ours." The old frog shook his head slowly. "It may be their fight today," he murmured, "but when it is over, it will be our suffering." The young frog tilted his head. But how? The old frog gestured towards the battle. "Only one bull can win. The other must lose. And when he does, he will be driven away, cast out from the herd, no longer welcome among his own kind." The young frog shifted nervously. He had never thought about what happened to the defeated. "And where do you think a beaten bull will go?" the old frog continued. "Will he vanish into the air? Will he grow wings and fly away?" The young frog's eyes widened. He suddenly understood. "The marsh," he whispered. The old frog nodded. "Yes, the marsh, our marsh. When the defeated bull is cast out, he will wander, searching for a place to rest. He will come here. He will trample our reeds. He will crush our burrows. He will destroy everything beneath his mighty hooves." The young frog gulped, his excitement melting into fear. He turned back to look at the bulls, who still fought fiercely, their hooves tearing up the earth, their breath coming in heavy, angry snorts. The ground shook with each mighty impact of their horns. But that isn't fair," the young frog croaked. "We did nothing. We are not part of their fight. Why should we be the ones to suffer?" The old frog let out a slow sigh. "That, my child, is the way of the world," he said. "The great and the mighty fight for power. But when they fall, it is the small and the weak who feel the weight of their defeat." The young frog shivered, suddenly feeling very small in a world ruled by creatures far, far bigger than himself. Just then, a loud cry rang across the meadow. One of the bulls had stumbled, his legs giving way beneath him. His rival wasted no time. He surged forward, slamming his horns into the fallen bull's side. The defeated bull bellowed in pain, his body rolling onto the torn grass. The other bulls cheered for their new leader. And then the loser rose, shaken and panting. His body was covered in dust, his eyes wild with defeat. He looked around at the herd, his home, his kind, and saw that he was no longer welcome. With a deep, pained grunt, the bull turned. He began to walk away, limping, leaving the meadow behind. He headed downward, toward the marsh, toward the frogs. The old frog sighed, knowing what would come next. He turned to the young frog, whose small body trembled. "Run," the old frog said softly. "Warn the others. We must be ready." The young frog nodded quickly and sprang into action, leaping back toward the pond as fast as his tiny legs could carry him. The reeds shook as he shouted to the other frogs, "The bull is coming! The bull is coming!" Panic spread through the marsh. Frogs leapt into the water, disappearing beneath the surface. Others scurried beneath roots and logs, desperate to find safety. And just in time. With a mighty crash, the bull stumbled into the marsh, his massive hooves splintering reeds, his heavy body flattening everything in his path. He snorted, tired and frustrated, not noticing the tiny creatures he crushed beneath him. By morning, the marsh would bear deep scars from his arrival. The frogs, small and helpless, had lost their homes, not because of their own mistakes, but because of the battle of the great. And as the old frog watched from his hiding place, he shook his head. It was always the same. The bulls and the frogs teaches us that the poor and weak often suffer for the struggles of the powerful. When the mighty fight over power, they rarely think of the innocent ones caught in their battles. But in the end, their actions have consequences that reach far beyond themselves, and it is often those with the least power who bear the heaviest burdens. The Stag at the Pool. The forest was quiet that morning, the golden rays of sunlight slipping through the canopy of leaves, casting shimmering patterns on the ground below. Birds sang their morning songs, and the air smelled fresh and green, filled with the rich scent of earth and dew. Among the towering trees and winding paths, a majestic stag moved gracefully, his sleek coat catching the light as he trotted toward his favourite spot, a crystal-clear pool in the heart of the woods. The pool was deep and still, like a giant mirror set into the ground. Every morning, the stag would come here to drink and rest, finding peace in the gentle ripples of the water. But today, as he leaned down to take a sip, something caught his eye, his reflection. For a moment, the stag froze, staring at himself. He had never really paid attention before, but now, as he gazed at his own image, his chest swelled with pride. His antlers were magnificent, tall, branching, and crowned like a king's golden crown. The sunlight caught their sharp edges, making them shine like polished wood. "Look at them," the stag murmured, tilting his head to admire his antlers from different angles. "So grand, so powerful. Any creature in the forest would envy such a sight." He felt stronger just looking at them, as though his antlers alone made him the mightiest creature in the woods. But then his eyes drifted downward, and his smile faded. His legs, long and lean, looked weak, thin, fragile. "What a shame," he muttered, stamping a hoof in frustration. "Look at them. They are too skinny, too plain, too ordinary. My antlers are the sign of a true ruler of the forest, yet I must carry them on these pitiful sticks." He sighed heavily, shaking his head. "If only my legs were as grand as my antlers, then I would be truly worthy of my own reflection." But just as he was about to turn away, something changed. A rustling in the bushes, a flicker of movement behind the trees, a deep, low growl. The lion. A golden shadow emerged from the undergrowth, stealthy and silent, but filled with power. The great beast's muscles rippled beneath his smooth fur, his piercing eyes locked onto the stag. The stag's heart leapt into his throat. His muscles tensed. He knew the danger. He knew what those eyes meant. Run! With a burst of energy, the stag sprang into motion, his hooves barely touching the ground as he flew across the forest floor. His thin, lean legs, the very legs he had despised, now carried him with lightning speed, stretching and springing with effortless grace. The lion roared and charged after him, his heavy paws pounding the earth. But the stag had the advantage. His legs were built for this. They were strong, swift, and tireless. With each powerful bound, he widened the distance between himself and the predator. For a moment, he felt invincible. "I was wrong," he thought, his breath coming in quick gasps. "My legs, they are my greatest gift. They carry me faster than even the mighty lion can run." But then disaster struck. The forest suddenly thickened around him. The open path gave way to a tangle of trees, their low branches stretching out like grasping fingers. The stag, moving too fast to slow down, darted into the dense thicket, and his magnificent antlers, the pride of his reflection, became his trap. They snagged on the twisted branches, pulling him to a sudden jarring stop. "No!" the stag gasped, jerking his head back and forth, trying to free himself. He twisted, kicked, yanked, but it was no use. The very antlers he had admired, the ones he had thought made him mighty, now held him prisoner. Behind him, the lion's footsteps grew louder, closer. The stag struggled desperately, his heart pounding in terror. "Not like this," he whispered. "I was escaping. My legs were saving me. But now I am trapped by the very thing I loved most." And then, with a final mighty leap, the lion pounced. The last thing the stag saw was the glint of teeth, the flicker of golden eyes. And in that final moment, as the forest fell silent once more, the stag understood his mistake. The stag at the pool teaches us that what is most truly valuable is often underrated. The stag admired his antlers for their beauty, but dismissed his legs as weak, only to realize too late that his legs were his greatest strength. Many times in life, we overlook the simple but essential gifts we have, longing instead for things that only seem grand. But true value lies not in appearance, but in usefulness. And sometimes what we take for granted is what we need the most. The frogs asking for a king. Deep in the heart of the wild wetlands, where reeds swayed in the wind and lily pads floated lazily on the water, there lived a great kingdom of frogs. They were many, they were loud, and they were restless. All day long, the frogs leapt from stone to stone, dived into the cool waters, and filled the marsh with their endless ribbits. Life was peaceful, perhaps too peaceful. One day, as the sun set in a blaze of orange and purple, a group of older frogs gathered on a mossy log to discuss something that had been troubling them. "Look at us," croaked the eldest among them. "We live without order, without rules. We do as we please, and yet we have no king." The other frogs nodded in agreement. "Every great kingdom has a ruler," another old frog declared. "The lions have their mighty leader. The birds fly under their chief. The ants march under a queen. But we have no one to guide us." A chorus of ribbits rose through the marsh as the frogs grumbled among themselves. They had never truly needed a king before, but now that the idea had been planted, they felt insulted by their own freedom. So they decided to do something about it. "Let us send a message to mighty Jupiter," the elder frog suggested. "Surely he, the ruler of all gods, will grant us a king." The idea was met with cheers, and so, under the moon's soft glow, a group of frogs was chosen to travel to Jupiter's temple, a great stone hidden deep in the forest, where the wind whispered through the trees as though carrying messages from the heavens. The frogs lifted their voices, croaking and pleading for Jupiter to send them a king, a great ruler who would bring power and order to their marshland. Far above in the heavens, Jupiter, the mighty ruler of gods, heard their cries. He stroked his golden beard, his eyes twinkling with amusement. "Foolish creatures," he murmured, "they do not know what they ask." But being a god of great patience, he decided to grant their request in a way that would teach them a lesson. With a flick of his hand, he picked up a huge heavy log and cast it down from the sky. Splash! The log crashed into the pond, sending water erupting into the air like a great fountain. The frogs screamed and scattered, diving beneath lily pads and hiding in the mud. The entire marsh trembled with fear. "A monster!" they cried, "a king too mighty for us to approach." For hours they stayed hidden, watching the log float motionless in the water. But as time passed, they realized something strange. The log did not move. It did not growl. It did not give orders. And most importantly, it did not chase them. Slowly, one brave frog swam up and poked it with his foot. Nothing. Another frog hopped onto it, and soon dozens followed, laughing and playing on their new king. "This is no king at all," they scoffed. "This is just a useless lump of wood. It does nothing. It says nothing. We wanted a ruler, not a floating stump." The frogs grumbled among themselves once more, deciding that this king was an insult. "We must ask Jupiter again," they cried. "We deserve a king who will truly rule us." And so, once more, a group of frogs swam to the temple, lifted their voices, and pleaded for a new king, one that was alive, strong, and powerful. Jupiter, growing amused at their impatience, decided to grant their request. This time he sent them an eel. The eel was long and slippery, gliding smoothly through the water. At first the frogs were delighted. "Look! He moves! He speaks!" The eel wiggled and twisted through the pond, greeting the frogs with a smile. He was kind and gentle, offering them friendly advice, but never enforcing any rules. For a while, the frogs were pleased, but then something changed. "This king is too soft," one frog grumbled. "He rules us, yes, but he does nothing. He never commands. He never punishes. He lets us do as we please." Another chorus of ribbits rang through the marsh. "We wanted a strong king, a king who makes us feel protected and important." The frogs, never satisfied, once again swam to the temple and pleaded with Jupiter. "Mighty Jupiter, we have asked twice, and twice you have given us weak rulers. Please send us a true king, one who will be strong, one who will make us fear him." Jupiter, now growing weary of their complaints, frowned. "You wish for a mighty king," he rumbled. "Then a mighty king you shall have." This time he sent them a heron. The heron was tall, with sharp eyes and a long, piercing beak. He arrived with majestic grace, his feathers gleaming in the sunlight. The frogs, at first, were in awe. At last, they croaked, "A true king!" But then something terrible happened. The heron did not speak. He did not welcome his new subjects. He did not offer guidance. Instead, he struck. Snap! His beak shot down and caught a helpless frog, swallowing him in an instant. The frogs screamed in terror. "Wait!" they cried. "What is he doing? A king is supposed to rule us, not eat us." But the heron did not care. Day by day he feasted upon them, thinning their numbers until the pond grew silent. The once loud marsh, once filled with the songs of frogs, became still. And when no frogs were left to complain, the heron moved on. The frogs asking for a king teaches us that when you seek to change your condition, be sure that you can better it. The frogs were unhappy with their peaceful lives and longed for a ruler, but in their impatience they did not consider the consequences of their demands. First, they received a ruler too weak, then one too soft, and finally one too cruel. Sometimes what we have is better than what we wish for. and rushing to change without thinking can lead to ruin. A dog and a shadow. The sun hung high in the sky, casting golden light over the land, warming the earth and making the river glisten like a ribbon of melted silver. Birds chirped from the trees, and the wind rustled the leaves in a soft whisper. It was the kind of day where everything seemed just right, especially for a hungry dog who had just stumbled upon a wonderful morsel of meat. This was no ordinary scrap. It was juicy, thick, and rich with flavour, the kind of meal a dog could only dream of. He had found it near the butcher's shop, a lucky treasure left just within his reach. His sharp teeth had seized it immediately, and now, with his prize clenched tightly in his jaws, he trotted away, eager to enjoy his feast in peace. His tail wagged as he moved through the village, past stone houses and wooden carts, through narrow alleys and bustling streets, until he reached the edge of a river. The water flowed lazily, reflecting the blue sky above. A narrow bridge stretched over it, made of old creaky planks, and the dog padded onto it, his claws clicking against the wood. As he stepped forward, something caught his eye. Beneath him, in the still waters of the river, he saw another dog staring up at him. But this was no ordinary dog. This dog also had a piece of meat in its mouth. The dog on the bridge froze, his eyes locked onto the image below. His ears perked up, his mouth watered. "What's this?" he thought, narrowing his eyes. "Another dog has a piece of meat just like mine. No, bigger than mine." A greedy hunger began to grow inside him. "I must have it," he thought. "Why settle for one piece of meat when I could have two?" He stared at the reflection, watching as the other dog held his meat just as tightly, mirroring his every move. The river was so clear, so perfect, that he never even considered that what he saw wasn't real. Without a moment of hesitation, his greed took over. With a sharp chomp, he snapped his jaws at the other dog, lunging towards the prize below. Splash! In an instant, his own piece of meat fell from his mouth, tumbling into the river. His heart leapt in panic as he watched it plop into the water, sending ripples dancing across the surface. The image of the other dog shattered into 1,000 fragments, vanishing in the disturbed waves. The truth hit him like a sudden gust of wind. There was no other dog. There was no other piece of meat. It had all been a shadow, a trick of the water, and now he had nothing. Frantically, he scrambled down to the riverbank, splashing into the cool water, snapping at the ripples where his delicious prize had sunk. But it was gone, lost beneath the surface, carried away by the gentle current. Dripping wet and empty-jawed, the dog pulled himself back onto the riverbank, his tail drooping. His stomach growled, but louder still was the voice in his head that whispered, "Foolish, foolish, foolish." He had been greedy. He had chased an illusion and lost something real in return. As he stood there, shivering and hungry, he realized his mistake. If only he had been satisfied with what he had. If only he had not reached for more than was truly there. But now it was too late. With one last regretful glance at the rippling water, the dog turned and padded away, a little colder, a little hungrier, and much, much wiser. A Dog and a Shadow teaches us that greed can lead to great loss. The dog had a real prize in his grasp, but his desire for more blinded him to the truth, and in the end he lost everything. This reminds us that those who are never satisfied with what they have, who always reach for more without thinking, may find themselves left with nothing at all. Instead of chasing illusions, we should appreciate what is already in our hands. The Fir Tree and the Bramble. In the heart of a great forest, where sunlight filtered through towering trees and the wind carried the scent of pine, there stood a proud fir tree. His trunk was tall and straight, his branches stretched wide, and his needles gleamed a deep green all year round. Birds made their nests in his branches, and the other trees of the forest whispered about his strength and beauty. The fir tree was admired by all, except for one small, humble bramble that grew close to his roots. Unlike the mighty fir, the bramble was low and tangled, its branches thorny and wild, creeping along the forest floor without elegance or grandeur. One afternoon, as the sun bathed the forest in warm golden light, the fir tree looked down at the bramble with a smug smile. "How pathetic you are," the fir tree scoffed. "You have no height, no strength, no grandeur. Look at me. I rise above all the trees, reaching toward the sky. My wood is strong, my branches mighty. When people come to the forest, they seek me to build homes, roofs, ships, and great halls. But you are nothing. No one builds with a bramble." The bramble, unbothered by the fir tree's words, stretched its thorny branches and swayed gently in the wind. "It is true," said the bramble with a quiet voice. "I am not tall. I am not grand. But tell me, my lofty friend, have you ever considered what happens to trees such as yourself?" The fir tree laughed, a deep rumbling sound that rustled through his needles. "Happens to me. I am cherished. My wood is used in great cities. My name is known beyond this forest. Unlike you, I am valuable." The bramble sighed. "You may see only your strength now," it said softly, "but I see the danger that follows it." The fir tree frowned, confused. "Danger? What danger?" Before the bramble could answer, the sound of footsteps echoed through the forest. The animals froze. The birds took flight. A group of woodcutters entered the clearing, their hands gripping axes and saws. The fir tree felt pride swell in his trunk. "See," he whispered to the bramble. "They come for me. They recognize my worth." The bramble, however, only shook his head. The woodcutters looked around, inspecting the trees. Their eyes landed on the tall, strong fir. "This one is perfect," one of them said. "Yes," another agreed. "Cut it down, and we will use its wood for beams and pillars." The fir tree suddenly felt uneasy. Cut me down?" he stammered. "Wait! I am meant to stand tall. I am meant to be admired." But the woodcutters did not hear his protests. With sharp swings of their axes, they struck his trunk. Chop! 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 The blows echoed through the forest, each strike cutting deeper, each swing pulling him closer to his fall. His towering frame quivered, his thick bark splintered, and the proud branches that once reached for the sky trembled under the weight of his fate. Crack! With one final strike, the fir tree fell, crashing to the ground with a thunderous thud. The once proud tree, who had stood so tall above the others, now lay on the forest floor, helpless and broken. The bramble watched quietly as the woodcutters carried the fir tree away. The forest was silent. The once mighty tree, who had boasted so proudly, had been taken, while the small, humble bramble remained untouched. After a long pause, the bramble whispered, "It is better to live humbly without fear than to be great and live in constant danger." And with that, the bramble stretched its thorny branches once more, continuing to grow safely, hidden from harm. The fir tree and the bramble teaches us that it is better to live humbly without worry than to be great and live in constant danger. The fir tree, proud of his strength, believed himself to be above others, but his value made him a target. Meanwhile, the bramble, though small and unremarkable, lived peacefully without fear. True fortune is not always in wealth or grandeur, but in the quiet peace of a life without constant risk. The Eagle and the Beetle. The sun blazed high in the sky, stretching its golden fingers over the land. Far above, where the air was crisp and cool, an eagle soared, her sharp eyes scanning the earth below. She was the queen of the skies, powerful and proud, feared by all creatures that crawled, ran, or flew. No one dared to challenge her, no one, that is, except a tiny creature that she hardly noticed. Down in the soft earth, hidden beneath a fallen log, lived the beetle. He was small, no bigger than a pebble, and he spent his days burrowing in the dirt, tending to his young, and watching the world move above him. The beetle did not seek power, nor did he wish to rule. He only wanted peace, a quiet life where he and his family could be safe. But fate had other plans. One day, as the eagle soared above, her stomach growled. She was hungry, and when she spotted something small and wriggling beneath the trees, she swooped down like a bolt of lightning. The beetle barely had time to react as the great bird's talons closed around his young, lifting them into the sky. "Please," the beetle cried, scurrying after her as fast as his tiny legs would carry him. "Spare them. They are not a meal for one as mighty as you." But the eagle only laughed, her wings slicing through the wind. "I take what I want," she said. "The sky is mine, and so is everything beneath it." And with that, she swallowed the beetle's young whole. The beetle stood frozen, his tiny body trembling with rage and grief. He was small, yes, but he would not be forgotten. He would not be powerless. A cold determination settled over him. "I may be tiny," he whispered, "but I will not let this go unpunished." That night, as the eagle slept high in her nest, the beetle crept up the great tree, climbing inch by inch until he reached her precious eggs. With all his strength, he pushed them from the nest, watching as they tumbled down, smashing against the rocks below. The eagle awoke to an empty nest. Furious, she shrieked into the sky. "Who dares destroy my young?" she bellowed. "Who would be so bold?" But she found no answer. Again and again she laid new eggs, and again the beetle destroyed them. No matter how high she built her nest, no matter how carefully she watched over it, the tiny creature always found a way. Finally, desperate and enraged, the eagle flew to Jupiter, the mighty ruler of the gods. "Oh, great Jupiter!" she cried. "A wicked creature, a tiny pest, destroys my young. I beg you, grant me protection. Let me make my nest in your lap, where no harm can come to my eggs." Jupiter, moved by the eagle's sorrow, nodded. "Come, build your nest here," he said, patting his mighty lap. "None shall dare harm your young while I watch over them." The eagle at last felt safe, but the beetle was not finished. Knowing he could not match Jupiter's strength, he used something far greater, his wits. The next day, as Jupiter sat upon his great throne, the beetle buzzed around his head, darting close to his eyes, landing on his brow, tickling his ears. Jupiter swatted at the pest, annoyed by its presence. He stood suddenly, shaking out his robes, trying to rid himself of the tiny creature. And as he did, the eagle's eggs tumbled from his lap. The eagle's screech of horror echoed across the heavens as her young shattered upon the ground below. Jupiter, shocked, turned to see what had happened. He found the beetle hovering before him, its tiny wings beating steadily in the air. "You protect the strong," the beetle said, his voice calm, "but ignored the wrong done to the weak. This was never a battle of strength, mighty Jupiter. It was a battle of justice." Jupiter sighed. He saw now that the beetle had been wronged. Even the smallest creature could not be ignored when their cause was just. The eagle, ashamed and defeated, lowered her head. She had never thought much of the beetle before, never imagined he could harm her. But now she understood. From that day forward, the eagle and the beetle never crossed paths again. The eagle no longer preyed upon creatures too small to fight back, and the beetle, having won his revenge, returned to his quiet life beneath the trees. Balance had been restored, and the skies once again belonged to all. The eagle and the beetle teaches us that the weak often revenge themselves on those who use them ill, even though they be the more powerful. The eagle, mighty and proud, thought herself untouchable. But the beetle's cleverness proved that even the smallest can bring down the strongest when they seek justice. Strength alone does not make one invincible. Wisdom, patience, and fairness hold far greater power. The Goatherd and the Goats. The wind howled through the valley, carrying with it a sharp, biting cold. Thick flakes of snow swirled in the air, covering the hills in a heavy white blanket. Trees groaned under the weight of ice, and the streams that once trickled through the land had frozen into still, glassy rivers. It was a day when no creature wished to be outside, and yet, trudging through the blizzard, a goatherd led his small herd of goats through the storm. The goatherd was a simple man, dressed in a thick woolen cloak that did little to keep out the bitter chill. His goats, covered in snow, bleated pitifully as they shivered in the cold. Their usual feeding grounds were buried under ice, and the wind had turned fierce, biting at their fur like unseen teeth. The goatherd knew he had to find shelter, fast. Through the blinding snowfall, his eyes caught sight of a dark opening in the side of a rocky hill. A cave. Relief flooded him as he hurried his goats forward. "Come now, little ones," he called, his voice nearly lost in the howling wind. "We shall rest here until the storm passes." But as he entered the cave, he stopped in his tracks. They were not alone. Inside, huddled together, was a herd of wild goats. They were larger, stronger, and more numerous than his own. Their eyes gleamed from the shadows, watching him with cautious curiosity. The goatherd, greedy thoughts stirring in his mind, felt a sudden excitement. "Look at them," he whispered to himself. "So many! If I can tame these wild goats, my herd will be the largest in the village. I will be envied by all my neighbours." His eyes darted to his own weary, frail goats, who still trembled from the cold, their hooves stamping anxiously. He had brought branches of dry leaves for them to eat, but now an idea crept into his mind. Why waste my food on my old goats when I can win over these strong wild ones instead? And so, with eager hands, he tossed the food to the wild goats, watching as they hungrily snatched up the branches, their rough fur shaking off the snow as they ate. His own goats watched in confusion, their bellies empty, their eyes pleading. But the goatherd ignored them, his heart set on impressing the wild goats. As the storm raged on, he continued to feed the newcomers, speaking softly to them, hoping they would come to trust him. "Stay with me," he murmured. "I will feed you, shelter you, and you will be part of my herd." The wild goats took the food without a second thought, but they did not nod, they did not bow, and they did not promise loyalty. Finally, after what felt like an endless night, the storm passed. The heavy clouds parted, and the first rays of morning light stretched over the snowy hills. The wind, once so furious, had softened to a quiet whisper. The goatherd stepped to the mouth of the cave and smiled. At last the storm is over. But before he could celebrate his fortune, a great rumble filled the cave. The wild goats, sensing their freedom, suddenly leapt forward, rushing past the goatherd like a stampede of thunder. "Wait!" he cried, reaching out. "Where are you going?" But they did not stop. With powerful leaps, they bounded back toward the hills and the woods, disappearing into the trees without so much as a backward glance. The goatherd was stunned, watching as the very goats he had tried to win over vanished into the wild. Then his stomach sank. He turned back to his own goats, the ones he had neglected. But there was nothing left. His faithful goats, the ones who had followed him through the storm, who had trusted him, who had been his companions for years, lay weak and still in the cave. Their empty stomachs had left them too frail to survive the cold. While the wild goats had grown strong on his generosity, his own herd had been left to starve. A terrible silence filled the cave. The goatherd fell to his knees, realization crashing over him like an icy wave. He had lost everything. His old friends, the ones who had always been by his side, were gone. His new friends, the ones he had foolishly trusted, had never been his friends at all. As he stumbled back to the village, empty-handed and ashamed, his neighbours laughed when they heard what had happened. "You fool," they said. "You abandoned the ones who were loyal to you for those who would never stay. And now you have neither." The goatherd lowered his head, knowing their words were true. And from that day forward, he never again placed new friends above the old ones who had stood by him all along. The goatherd and the goats teaches us that those who neglect their old friends for the sake of new ones are rightly served if they lose both. The goatherd, blinded by greed, thought he could replace his loyal herd with something greater, only to realize too late that true friendships and trust should never be cast aside for empty promises. Anansi and the Wisdom Pot, a tale of greed and the gift of sharing. In a time when the earth was still young, and the sun danced playfully with the shadows of towering trees, there lived a spider named Anansi. He was no ordinary creature of the forest. Anansi was a trickster, a spinner of tales and schemes, whose 8 legs carried him through the vibrant landscapes of West Africa. His glossy black body glistened in the sunlight, and his sharp eyes sparkled with mischief. The animals of the land knew him well, for he was as clever as the wind and twice as unpredictable. Yet beneath his cunning exterior lay a heart shadowed by selfishness. Anansi believed that the world's treasures, be they ripe fruits, sparkling rivers, or even the secrets of the universe, should belong to him alone. One lazy afternoon, as Anansi lounged beneath the sprawling branches of a baobab tree, his keen ears caught the chatter of 2 brightly feathered birds perched above. Their voices were light and musical, but their words carried a weight that stirred Anansi's curiosity. "Have you heard of the wisdom pot?" one bird chirped. "They say it holds all the knowledge of the world, every riddle solved, every mystery unveiled. Whoever claims it will be wiser than the gods themselves." Anansi's heart thudded in his tiny chest. A pot filled with all the wisdom of the world. His mind raced with possibilities. "If I had that pot," he whispered to himself, "no one could ever outsmart me. I'd be the cleverest creature alive, not the lion with his strength, nor the owl with her night-seeing eyes. Me, Anansi." The idea took root like a seed in fertile soil, and before the birds could flutter away, he was already plotting his next move. Without wasting a moment, Anansi set out on a grand quest. His 8 legs skittered across the forest floor, weaving through emerald ferns and over gnarled roots. The air was thick with the scent of earth and blossoms, and the distant hum of a river sang in his ears. He questioned every creature he met, sly hyenas, chattering monkeys, even the slow-moving snails that glistened in the dew. "Where is the wisdom pot?" he demanded, his voice sharp with impatience. Most laughed at his question, their eyes glinting with amusement. "Wisdom isn't a thing you can hold, Anansi," a monkey called from the treetops. "It's something you live." But Anansi ignored their mockery. He was determined to find this treasure and keep it for himself. Days turned into weeks as Anansi journeyed deeper into the wild heart of the land. His legs ached, and his once shiny body was dusted with the grit of travel, but his resolve never wavered. At last he came upon a hidden cave nestled between 2 ancient boulders. The entrance was draped in vines, and the air around it shimmered with a quiet mystery. Guarding the cave stood a tortoise, his shell weathered and wise, his eyes deep pools of knowing. He watched Anansi approach with a slow, deliberate gaze. "What brings you here, little spider?" the tortoise asked, his voice rumbling like distant thunder. Anansi straightened himself, puffing out his chest. "I've come for the wisdom pot," he declared. "I know it's in that cave, and it's mine to take." The tortoise tilted his head, a faint smile creasing his wrinkled face. "The wisdom pot is no ordinary prize, Anansi. It's a gift from the gods, meant to light the world, not to be locked away. Wisdom grows when it's shared, not when it's hoarded." Anansi waved a dismissive leg. "I don't need your lectures, old one. I want that wisdom for myself. Step aside, or I'll weave a trick to move you." The tortoise sighed, his breath a soft breeze against the vines. "Go then," he said, shifting his heavy body. "But mark my words, Anansi, greed blinds even the cleverest of minds." Anansi scampered past, his excitement drowning out the tortoise's warning. Inside the cave, the air was cool and damp, and a faint glow illuminated the shadows. There, resting on a moss-covered stone, sat the wisdom pot. It was a humble clay vessel, no larger than a melon, yet it pulsed with a gentle light that seemed to hum with life. Anansi's eyes widened as he crept closer. "It's mine," he breathed, wrapping his legs around the pot. "All the wisdom in the world, mine!" He lifted the pot triumphantly, feeling its warmth seep into his body. But as he exited the cave and began his journey home, a new worry gnawed at him. "If I keep this pot with me, someone might steal it," he muttered, glancing suspiciously at the rustling leaves. "The fox is sneaky. The hawk has sharp eyes. What if they come for my prize?" His gaze drifted upward, landing on a towering tree with branches that stretched toward the heavens. "Yes," he said, nodding to himself. "I'll hide it at the top where no one can reach it. It'll be safe there, and I'll visit it whenever I need a bit of wisdom." With the pot clutched tightly, Anansi approached the tree. Its trunk was rough and wide, its bark etched with the scars of time. He began to climb, his legs gripping the wood with practiced ease. But the wisdom pot was heavier than he'd expected, and with every step, it slipped and swayed in his grasp. He tried holding it with 2 legs, then 3, then 4, but it refused to stay steady. Sweat beaded on his brow as he muttered curses under his breath. "Stupid pot! Why won't you cooperate?" From below came a small, curious voice. "Father, what are you doing?" It was Kweku, Anansi's youngest son, who had trailed after him through the forest. Kweku's eyes were bright with wonder as he watched his father struggle up the tree. "I'm hiding the wisdom pot!" Anansi snapped, his voice tight with frustration. "But this wretched thing keeps slipping." Kweku cocked his head, studying the scene. "Why don't you tie it to your back, father? Then your legs would be free to climb." Anansi froze mid-step. The simplicity of the idea struck him like a thunderbolt. Tie it to his back? Of course! Why hadn't he thought of that? His pride shriveled as he realized his son, his young, untested son, had seen what he, the great Anansi, had missed. A hot flush of shame crept through him, followed by a wave of fury. "I'm supposed to be the wisest now," he thought. "How dare Kweku outsmart me?" In a burst of rage, Anansi flung the pot from the tree. "If I can't have it all, no one will," he shouted. The pot soared through the air, spinning wildly before crashing to the ground. It shattered with a sound like breaking glass, and from its fragments erupted a dazzling light. The wisdom burst forth like a flock of birds, scattering on the wind to every corner of the earth. It seeped into the soil, danced with the leaves, and whispered through the rivers, touching every creature and every heart with its glow. Anansi stared down in disbelief, his legs trembling. The pot lay in pieces, its light gone, its power lost to him forever. He scrambled down the tree, clawing at the shards in a desperate bid to reclaim what he'd thrown away. But it was no use. The wisdom had spread beyond his reach. Kweku stepped closer, his voice soft. "Father, what happened? Where did the light go?" Anansi slumped to the ground, his breath heavy with defeat. "It's gone, Kweku. The wisdom scattered to the world. It's not mine anymore. It belongs to everyone." Kweku smiled, a gentle warmth in his eyes. "Maybe that's for the best, father. Wisdom isn't meant to be kept in a pot. It's meant to be free, so we can all learn from it." For the first time, Anansi felt the weight of his actions. The tortoise's words echoed in his mind, and Kweku's quiet wisdom pierced his stubborn heart. He had tried to hoard what could not be contained, and in doing so, he'd lost it. But in its loss, the world had gained something greater. From that day forward, Anansi shed his greed like an old skin. He still spun tales and played tricks, but he also shared what he knew, teaching lessons to all who would listen. And though he never held all the wisdom again, he found a deeper joy in its sharing. The story of Anansi and the wisdom pot teaches a powerful lesson. Wisdom is meant to be shared, not hoarded. Anansi begins with a selfish desire to possess all the world's knowledge, believing it will make him unbeatable. His journey to find the pot is driven by greed, and even when warned by the tortoise, he refuses to see wisdom as anything but a prize to claim. Yet his plan crumbles when Kweku's simple suggestion reveals Anansi's own limitations, sparking a tantrum that shatters the pot and spreads its contents to the world. This tale shows that wisdom thrives when it is given freely. Anansi's attempt to lock it away leads to his failure, while its release benefits everyone. The tortoise and Kweku both understand what Anansi does not. Knowledge grows through exchange, not isolation. In real life, this reminds us that holding on to what we know, whether skills, ideas, or experiences, limits its potential. Sharing fosters growth, connection, and collective strength. Anansi's transformation at the end underscores this truth. True wisdom lies not in possession, but in the generous act of passing it on. Coyote and the Buffalo, a tale of greed, loss, and redemption. In the sprawling expanse of the American West, where the horizon stretches endlessly and the sun bathes the plains in shades of gold and crimson, there lived a cunning trickster known as Coyote. His name was whispered across the grasslands, carried by the wind through canyons and over hills, a name synonymous with mischief and guile. Coyote was a creature of insatiable curiosity and appetite, forever roaming the vast landscape in search of adventure, or more often, something to fill his growling stomach. His amber eyes gleamed with a spark of cleverness, and his wiry frame moved with a restless energy that belied his often selfish intentions. One crisp morning, as the dew still clung to the blades of grass and the sky blushed with the first light of dawn, Coyote found himself wandering the prairie. His stomach rumbled, a persistent reminder that he hadn't eaten in days. The endless sea of golden grass offered little in the way of sustenance, and Coyote's patience was wearing thin. That was when he spotted it, a magnificent buffalo, standing alone amidst the plains like a monarch of the wilderness. Its massive form cast a shadow that stretched far across the ground, its thick fur rippling in the breeze, and its deep, wise eyes reflecting a quiet strength that commanded respect. Coyote's mouth watered at the sight. Here was a feast worthy of his cunning, a prize that could satisfy his hunger for days. His mind raced, spinning a web of deceit as he padded closer, his paws silent against the earth. With a grin that revealed his sharp teeth, he called out, "Greetings, mighty buffalo! I've heard tales of your strength and grandeur. Surely you are the greatest creature to roam these lands." The buffalo turned its massive head, its gaze settling on Coyote with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. It had heard of Coyote's reputation, tales of trickery and betrayal that preceded him like a shadow. "What do you want, Coyote?" the buffalo rumbled, its voice deep and resonant like the roll of thunder across the plains. Coyote widened his eyes, feigning innocence. "Why, nothing at all, my friend. I only wish to honor you with my admiration." "But," he added, tilting his head as if struck by a sudden thought, I can't help but notice you seem weary. A creature as grand as you shouldn't have to toil alone. Perhaps I could be of service." The buffalo snorted, unconvinced. It had travelled far in search of fresh grazing lands, and the relentless sun had indeed drained its strength. Yet it knew better than to trust Coyote blindly. "I am weary," it admitted, its tone cautious, "but I'm no fool. Your name is tied to deceit, Coyote. Why should I believe you?" Coyote let out a dry, rustling laugh, like leaves skittering across the ground. "Oh, how the past clings to me! But I assure you, I've changed. Let me prove it. I know of a meadow not far from here, a place of lush grass and cool water, perfect for a weary traveller like yourself. Follow me, and you'll see I mean you no harm." The buffalo hesitated, its instincts warring with the promise of rest. The meadow sounded tempting, a haven after days of wandering. After a long moment, it sighed, its breath a heavy gust. "Very well, Coyote, lead the way, but know this, my eyes will be on you." Coyote's heart leapt with glee, though he kept his expression neutral. He had the buffalo's trust, fragile though it was, and that was all he needed. As they set off across the plains, Coyote's mind churned with plans. The meadow was real, yes, but it would also be the perfect place to strike. A rested buffalo might be strong, but a buffalo caught off guard was vulnerable. He could almost taste the victory already. To pass the time, and to keep the buffalo's suspicions at bay, Coyote spun tales of his supposed exploits. He spoke of outwitting eagles, racing the wind, and befriending the stars, each story more absurd than the last. The buffalo listened in silence, its steady gaze never wavering, as if searching for the lie beneath the words. At last they reached the meadow, a breathtaking oasis nestled amidst the endless prairie. The grass was a vibrant green, swaying gently in the breeze, and a clear brook wound through it, its waters sparkling like liquid silver. The buffalo's eyes widened, a rare flicker of awe crossing its stoic face. "This is a wondrous place," it said, its voice softening with gratitude. "Thank you, Coyote. Perhaps I was wrong to doubt you." Coyote's smile stretched wider, his eyes glinting with a predatory sheen. "Think nothing of it, my friend. Rest now. Enjoy the meadow. I'll keep watch and ensure your safety." His words dripped with false kindness, a mask for the hunger burning within. The buffalo, still cautious but overcome by exhaustion, nodded and settled into the soft grass. Its massive body sank into the earth, and its eyes fluttered shut, lulled by the meadow's peace. Coyote watched, barely containing his excitement. He crept closer, his claws sliding out, ready to strike. A sudden rustling shattered the silence. Coyote froze, ears twitching, as a group of Native American hunters burst from the nearby bushes, their bows drawn and arrows glinting in the sunlight. "Halt, Coyote!" their leader shouted, his voice sharp with authority. "We've tracked this buffalo for days. It's ours by right. You'll not steal it from us." Coyote's stomach dropped. Outnumbered and outmatched, he had no choice. With a snarl of frustration, he turned and bolted into the wilderness, his tail low and his dreams of a feast crumbling behind him. The hunters approached the buffalo with reverence, their movements deliberate and respectful. They knew the buffalo was more than mere prey. It was a sacred provider, a cornerstone of their survival. With practiced care, they prepared to take only what they needed, offering prayers to honor its spirit and ensure its sacrifice would sustain their people. The buffalo stirred, its eyes opening to meet the hunter's gaze. There was no fear in its expression, only a quiet acceptance of the cycle it was part of. It understood its role, and it faced its end with dignity. From a distant ridge, Coyote watched, his hunger gnawing at him like a relentless beast. His cunning had failed him, his greed leaving him empty-handed. As the hunters departed with their bounty, he slunk away, the bitter taste of regret lingering on his tongue. Days stretched into weeks, and Coyote's hunger only grew. The plains, once a playground for his schemes, now felt hostile and barren. The other animals avoided him, their trust eroded by tales of his trickery. He was alone, a shadow drifting through a world that no longer welcomed him. One twilight, as the sky burned with the last embers of day, Coyote stumbled upon a gnarled tree where a wise old owl perched. Its feathers were silvered by age, and its piercing eyes seemed to see beyond the surface of things. Coyote, desperate and humbled, approached. "Greetings, wise owl," he said, his voice raw with need. "I've lost everything to my greed. I'm starving, shunned, and without hope. Tell me, how can I find my way back?" The owl regarded him silently, its gaze cutting through his defences. "Coyote," it finally said, its voice a soft whisper on the wind, "your greed has brought you low, but redemption is not lost to you. The lesson is simple. Deceit and selfishness lead to ruin. True sustenance, true peace comes from humility and respect for all life." Coyote's ears perked up, a flicker of hope igniting within him. "But how do I prove I've changed? How do I earn back what I've lost?" The owl tilted its head, considering. "There's a village nearby, struggling after a failed harvest. Winter looms, and they face starvation. Help them, Coyote. Show the spirits and yourself that you can rise above your past." With a surge of determination, Coyote nodded. "I'll do it. I'll help them and make things right." For the first time in a long while, his steps had purpose as he set off toward the village. When he arrived, the villagers were gathered around a dwindling fire, their faces gaunt with worry. Coyote stepped into the flickering light, his head bowed. "Greetings, villagers. I know my name brings distrust, but I've come to help. Your crops have failed and winter nears. Let me aid you, and if I falter, cast me out." The villagers murmured, their skepticism palpable. "Why trust you, Coyote?" one demanded. "You're a trickster, nothing more." "I was," Coyote admitted, his voice steady. "But I've learned a hard lesson, and I want to prove it. Give me a chance." After a tense silence, the village elder stepped forward. "Very well. Our food is nearly gone. If you can provide for us, we'll be grateful. If not, you'll leave." Coyote's mind raced, not with schemes, but with a genuine desire to help. He thought of the buffalo, its strength and sacrifice. Closing his eyes, he whispered a prayer. "Great buffalo, I wronged you with my greed. I'm sorry. Guide me now, so I can aid these people." A gentle breeze stirred the air, carrying the faint echo of a buffalo's call. Coyote's heart lifted. He wasn't alone. Turning to the villagers, he said, "There's a buffalo herd nearby. If we hunt together, taking only what we need and honoring their spirits, we can survive the winter." The villagers exchanged wary glances but agreed. Together, they trekked to the herd, Coyote leading with a newfound humility. "Approach with respect," he instructed. "We take only enough, and we give thanks for their gift." Under his guidance, the hunt was a success. The villagers worked as one, their arrows swift and their prayers heartfelt. They returned with enough meat and hides to last the season. their spirits lifted by the bounty, and by Coyote's transformation. But Coyote knew his redemption wasn't complete. Leaving the village, he sought out the animals he'd wronged, the rabbits he'd cheated, the birds he'd deceived. To each he offered sincere apologies, vowing to live in harmony. Some forgave him, others watched warily, but all saw the change in his eyes. Weeks turned to months, and Coyote's reputation shifted. No longer a pariah, he became a figure of wisdom, a trickster reformed by his own mistakes. The plains welcomed him once more, and though hunger still gnawed at times, he faced it with dignity, knowing he'd found something greater than a full belly: peace. The tale of Coyote and the buffalo weaves a rich tapestry of greed, loss, and ultimate redemption, delivering a timeless lesson. Greed and deceit lead to ruin, while humility and respect pave the way to harmony and fulfillment. Coyote begins as a creature driven by selfish desire, willing to betray the buffalo for a meal. His cunning nearly succeeds, but fate intervenes, stripping him of his prize and leaving him to face the consequences of his actions. This loss is the first step in his journey, a stark reminder that selfish pursuits often end in emptiness. The owl's wisdom marks the turning point, offering Coyote a path to redemption through service and humility. By helping the villagers and seeking forgiveness from the animals, Coyote learns that true sustenance isn't just physical. It's the peace that comes from living honorably. His transformation isn't easy. It requires facing distrust and proving his sincerity. But it's through this struggle that he grows. The lesson resonates beyond the story. Our actions ripple outward, shaping how we're seen and how we see ourselves. Greed may promise quick rewards, but it's a hollow path. Respect and humility, though harder, build lasting bonds and inner strength. Coyote's journey shows that redemption is always possible, no matter how far one strays, if one is willing to change and make amends. It's a call to reflect on our own choices, to choose integrity over selfishness, and to find richness in community rather than conquest. Loki's punishment, a tale of betrayal, wrath, and eternal suffering. In the realm of Asgard, where the gods of the Norse pantheon reigned supreme, the air shimmered with a golden hue. Towering halls of silver and gold rose into the heavens, their spires catching the light of an eternal dawn. The sound of laughter and song drifted through the streets, a testament to the harmony that once defined this divine paradise. At its heart sat Odin, the All-Father, his single eye piercing the veil of fate, his wisdom unmatched. Beside him stood Thor, the Thunderer, his mighty hammer Mjolnir, a symbol of raw power, and Balder, the Radiant, whose gentle spirit and luminous beauty made him the most beloved of all the gods. Yet within this glittering tapestry of divinity lurked a figure of shadow, Loki, the trickster. Loki was an enigma, his origins shrouded in mystery. Some claimed he was born of giants, others that he sprang from the chaos of the cosmos itself. His dark hair framed a sharp, handsome face, and his green eyes sparkled with a restless, mischievous glint. Loki was a master of deception, his tongue as quick as his mind, weaving schemes that amused and irritated the gods in equal measure. Though he walked among them as a brother, his heart simmered with envy and discontent, a coiled serpent waiting to strike. For a time, Loki's antics were tolerated. He'd turn Thor's hammer into a feather, or trick the gods into absurd quarrels, only to laugh as they untangled his chaos. But beneath his playful facade lay a darker impulse, one that would soon unravel the peace of Asgard. The turning point came with Balder, the god of light and purity. Balder's presence was a gift. His smile could banish shadows, his voice a melody that soothed even the fiercest tempers. The gods adored him, and his mother Frigg cherished him above all else. But one fateful night, Balder awoke trembling from a dream of death. He saw a spear pierce his heart, darkness swallowing his light, and a chilling silence falling over Asgard. Troubled, he confided in Frigg, whose love for her son burned fiercer than any flame. Frigg, goddess of foresight and devotion, set out to defy fate. She journeyed across the 9 realms, her voice soft but resolute, extracting oaths from all things, stone and steel, fire and frost, beast and bird, that they would never harm Balder. Trees bent to her will, rivers swore their loyalty, and even the winds whispered their promise. Her task was monumental, and when she returned to Asgard, she believed her son was safe, wrapped in an invincible shield of her making. The gods, delighted by Balder's newfound invulnerability, turned it into a game. In the great hall of Gladsheim, they gathered to hurl spears, axes, and stones at Balder, laughing as each weapon bounced harmlessly off his skin. Thor roared with glee, clapping his brother on the back, while Odin watched with a faint, knowing smile. Balder stood at the centre, his golden hair gleaming, his calm acceptance of their jests only deepening their love for him. But Loki lingered at the edges, his smile thin and sharp. The sight of Balder's invincibility gnawed at him. "Why him?" he muttered, his voice barely a whisper. "Why should he be untouchable, adored, while I am merely endured?" Jealousy coiled in his chest, a venomous thread that wove itself into a plan so dark it chilled even his own heart. Yet once the idea took hold, Loki could not resist its pull. Under the guise of an old woman hunched and frail, Loki approached Frigg one evening as she sat weaving by the hearth. "Great queen," he rasped, his voice trembling with false reverence, "is it true your son cannot be harmed?" Frigg, her eyes soft with maternal pride, nodded. "Yes, I have secured oaths from all things, except one. A small mistletoe plant, so tender and weak, I deemed it no threat. It alone did not swear." Loki's pulse quickened, though his face remained a mask of curiosity. "Thank you, kind lady," he said, bowing, before slipping into the shadows. His mind raced as he travelled to a distant wood where the mistletoe grew, its pale sprigs swaying in the breeze. With deft hands, he crafted a slender spear from the plant, its tip sharp despite its fragile appearance. It was an unassuming weapon, but in Loki's grasp it carried the weight of treachery. The following day, the gods resumed their game. Balder stood radiant as ever, weapons clattering uselessly at his feet, the hall alive with mirth. Loki entered silently, the mistletoe spear concealed beneath his cloak. His eyes fell on Hod, Balder's blind brother, who sat apart, his face etched with quiet longing. Hod's blindness kept him from joining the revelry, and Loki saw his chance. "Poor Hod," Loki said, his tone dripping with false pity as he approached. "Why do you not honour your brother with a throw?" Hod turned his sightless eyes toward Loki. "I cannot see, and I have no weapon." Loki's lips curled into a smile. "Let me help you," he said, pressing the mistletoe spear into Hod's hands. "Take this, and I'll guide your aim. Throw it, and share in the joy." Hod hesitated, his fingers tightening around the spear, but Loki's voice was smooth and coaxing, and at last Hod nodded. With Loki's hand steadying his own, Hod drew back and hurled the spear. It sailed through the air, a whisper of death disguised as a jest, and struck Balder square in the chest. A gasp tore through the hall as Balder staggered, his light dimming like a snuffed candle. Blood bloomed across his tunic, and he fell, lifeless, to the polished floor. Frigg's scream rent the air, a sound of pure anguish that shook the pillars of Asgard. The gods stood stunned, their laughter replaced by a suffocating silence. Grief gave way to fury. Odin, with his piercing gaze, unravelled the truth. Loki's hand had guided the spear. His deceit had slain their brightest star. The gods turned their wrath upon the trickster, vowing retribution. Loki fled, shape-shifting into a salmon to slip through rivers and streams. But the gods' pursuit was relentless. Thor cast nets of thunder, and at last they dragged Loki from the water, his struggles futile against their righteous rage. They hauled him to a cavern deep beneath the earth, a place of jagged stone and eternal shadow. There the gods devised a punishment to match his crime. Loki's sons, Nafi and Vali, were brought before him, their eyes wide with fear. In a cruel twist, Vali was transformed into a savage wolf, his jaws snapping as he tore Nafi apart. From Nafi's entrails, the gods forged chains, unbreakable, glistening with a grotesque sheen, and bound Loki to 3 sharp rocks that pierced the cave floor. Loki fought, his screams reverberating off the walls, but the bonds held tight. Above his head they hung a serpent, its scales gleaming with malice, its fangs dripping venom that fell in slow, searing drops onto Loki's face. Each splash burned like molten iron, wrenching cries of agony from his throat. His body convulsed, his once proud form reduced to a vessel of torment. Yet amidst this horror stood Sigyn, Loki's wife, her loyalty unshaken. She held a wooden bowl above him, catching the venom with trembling hands. Her face was a mask of sorrow, her eyes red with unshed tears, but she did not falter. When the bowl brimmed, she turned to empty it, and in those fleeting moments the venom struck Loki's skin, drawing fresh howls of pain. The gods stood watch, their faces carved from stone. Odin spoke, his voice a rumble of finality. "Here you shall remain, Loki, until the twilight of the gods. Your betrayal has darkened Asgard, and your suffering will be everlasting." Loki's eyes blazed with defiance, even as pain racked his body. "Ragnarok will come," he rasped, "and I will rise again. You will see." Odin turned away, the gods following, leaving Loki to his fate. The cave became a monument to his punishment, Sigyn's silent vigil, a haunting echo of love amidst ruin. The myth of Loki's punishment teaches a profound lesson. Betrayal and mischief carry heavy consequences, and harmful actions will ultimately be repaid. Loki's envy drives him to orchestrate Balder's death, shattering the harmony of Asgard. His punishment, bound eternally with venom searing his flesh, mirrors the magnitude of his crime. The gods' unrelenting justice reflects a universal truth. Deceit and malice invite retribution. This tale warns against the perils of selfishness and betrayal. Loki's brief triumph is overshadowed by his endless suffering and the pain it inflicts on Sigyn, who remains steadfast despite his actions. It's a reminder that our choices ripple outward, affecting not just ourselves, but those around us. In life, this myth cautions that cunning and harm may yield temporary gains, but they lead to isolation and inevitable reckoning, a timeless lesson etched in Loki's anguished cries. The Tale of Urashima Taro, a myth of time, kindness, and the weight of eternity. Long ago, in a small fishing village nestled along the rugged coast of Japan, there lived a humble young fisherman named Urashima Taro. He was known for his gentle heart, often freeing the smallest fish caught in his net, and mending the boats of his neighbours without asking for coin. One breezy morning, as he walked along the shore, he heard the shrill cries of children gathered around a tide pool. They were pelting a small turtle with stones, laughing as it flailed helplessly. Urashima rushed forward, scattering the children with a stern shout, and knelt to cradle the injured creature. Its shell was cracked, and one eye was swollen shut. "Little one," he murmured, "the sea is your home, not this cruelty." He waded into the waves and released the turtle, watching as it vanished into the emerald depths. 3 days later, while Urashima mended his nets alone on his boat, a voice called out to him, a voice like the sigh of the tide. "Urashima Taro," it whispered. He turned and saw the turtle he'd saved floating beside the boat, its shell now gleaming like polished jade. "You showed me mercy," it said. "The Dragon King of the Sea wishes to thank you. Will you let me carry you to his palace?" Urashima hesitated. The sea was vast and untamed, and fishermen told tales of those who'd vanished into its depths. Yet the turtle's eyes held no deceit. "Lead the way," he said. The turtle grew until its back was broad as a ship's deck. Urashima climbed aboard, and they plunged into the waves. Schools of silver fish parted before them. Bioluminescent jellyfish pulsed like lanterns in the dark, and coral castles rose from the ocean floor, their spires adorned with pearls. At last, they arrived at Rugujo, the Dragon Palace, a realm where time bent like seaweed in the current. Its gates were carved from whalebone, its walls shimmering with abalone, and gardens of anemones swayed in eternal bloom. The Dragon King, a being with scales like midnight and eyes like molten gold, welcomed Urashima as an honored guest. "Your kindness has moved me," he said. "Stay here as long as you wish, and know only peace." Days melted into weeks as Urashima wandered the palace. He feasted on dishes that tasted of moonlight, danced with mermaids whose songs made his heart ache, and strolled gardens where cherry blossoms never fell. The Dragon King's daughter, Princess Otohime, became his companion. Her laughter was the ripple of a stream, her hair a cascade of sea foam. She showed him wonders, whales that spoke in sonorous hymns, koi that painted the water with their tails, and tides that obeyed her whispered commands. Yet as the months passed, a quiet unease stirred in Urashima. He missed the cry of gulls, the smell of salt-crusted wood, and his mother's voice humming as she mended nets. When he confided this to Otohime, her smile faltered. "Time flows differently here," she said. "A day in Rugujo is a year in your world. Stay with me, and I will give you eternity." She pressed a small lacquered box into his hands. "Tamatebako, the jeweled box of time. But promise me," she begged, "never open this box. It holds what you seek and what you fear." Urashima's heart ached. He loved Otohime, but the memory of his village gnawed at him. "I must see my mother one last time," he said. Reluctantly, the turtle carried him back to the surface. When Urashima reached the shore, the world he knew was gone. The fishing huts had crumbled to mossy stones. The faces in the village were strangers, their clothes strange, their speech unfamiliar. An old man tending a shrine squinted at him. "Urashima Taro. That name is from a legend, a fisherman lost at sea centuries ago." Centuries. The word struck him like a wave. He stumbled to the beach, clutching the tamatebako. Despair clawed at his throat. What had he done? His mother, his friends, his life, all dust. In his grief, he forgot Otohime's warning and pried open the box. A wisp of smoke, white as a ghost, curled into the air. It wrapped around him, and in an instant his body withered. His hair turned silver, his skin sagged, and his bones creaked like driftwood. The smoke was his stolen time, rushing back to claim him. As the last breath left his lips, the wind carried his voice to the sea. "Otohime!" Far below, in the Dragon Palace, Princess Otohime wept. Her tears became pearls, sinking into the dark where the turtle waited, eternal and alone. Urashima Taro's tale is a haunting meditation on the cost of timelessness and the fragility of human bonds. His kindness saved a life, but his desire to reclaim the past destroyed him. The story warns that time cannot be bargained with or outrun. It flows relentlessly, and to cling to what is gone is to lose oneself. Yet it also celebrates the beauty of fleeting moments, the laughter of loved ones, the comfort of home, and the courage to choose a mortal life, however brief, over an eternity of empty splendor. True fulfillment lies not in escaping time, but in cherishing its passage. Pandora's Box, a myth of curiosity and the spark that saved the world. In the dawn of time, when the gods of Olympus ruled the heavens and humanity wandered the earth in innocent bliss, the world was a tapestry of simplicity. Mortals knew no pain, no hunger, no greed, until Prometheus, the titan of foresight, defied Zeus by stealing fire from the sun's chariot and gifting it to humankind. With fire, humans forged tools, built cities, and kindled the flames of ambition. But Zeus, king of the gods, seethed with rage. Prometheus had stolen divinity for mortals, and such arrogance could not go unpunished. Yet Zeus's vengeance would not be swift or simple. He devised a trap, a masterpiece of beauty and treachery that would curse humanity forever. He summoned Hephaestus, the god of the forge, and commanded him to sculpt a being of irresistible allure. From clay and starlight, Hephaestus moulded the first woman, her form radiant, her face a mirror of the heavens. Aphrodite breathed into her the warmth of desire. Athena gifted her with deft hands and a sharp mind, and Hermes bestowed a silver tongue and a restless heart. She was named Pandora, all gifted, for every god had contributed to her making. Yet Zeus's design was cruel. Her curiosity, he knew, would undo her and all of humanity. As a wedding gift, he presented her with a sealed pithos, an ancient jar adorned with celestial carvings and bound by divine magic. "Guard this carefully," Zeus warned, his voice honeyed with false concern. "Within lies a treasure meant only for the gods. To open it would bring ruin." Pandora was sent to Earth to wed Epimetheus, brother of Prometheus. Though Prometheus had warned his kin to refuse gifts from Zeus, Epimetheus, whose name meant afterthought, was enchanted by Pandora's grace. "What harm could beauty bring?" he murmured, dismissing his brother's warnings. For a time their life was idyllic. Pandora tended gardens of violets and sage, while Epimetheus marvelled at her laughter. Yet the jar loomed in their home, its presence a silent whisper. By day Pandora ignored it, busying herself with song and craft. By night it haunted her dreams. Shadows slithered from its cracks, hissing promises and threats. "Open us! We are longing. We are regret. We are truth." One afternoon, As sunlight pooled in their hearth-room, Pandora traced the jar's intricate engravings. Her finger brushed a hairline fissure in the lid, and a wisp of darkness escaped, a tendril that dissolved into the air like smoke. She recoiled, yet the act stirred something primal within her. The gods had crafted her too well. Her mind thirsted for answers. Her heart ached to unravel the mystery. "What harm could one glance do?" she whispered, her hands trembling. The moment she pried open the lid, the sky shattered. A shrieking tempest erupted from the jar, a maelstrom of winged horrors that blotted out the sun. Plague, with its rotting wings, clawed at her face. Greed, a serpentine shadow, coiled around her throat. War, a crimson beast, roared like thunder as it soared into the world. Sorrow, envy, deceit, and despair, evils long imprisoned by the gods, poured forth in a relentless tide. Pandora screamed, slamming the lid shut, but it was too late. The evils spiraled across the earth. Rivers turned to blood, friendships curdled into rivalry, and children wept without knowing why. Epimetheus rushed to her side, his face ashen. "What have you done?" he cried, not in anger, but in despair. Pandora collapsed, clutching the jar. "I heard voices. I only wanted to understand." Yet within the jar, muffled by the cacophony, something fluttered, a sound as soft as a moth's wings. When Pandora dared to open the jar again, a single ember glowed within. It was Elpis, hope, fragile yet unyielding. It floated into her palms, its warmth seeping into her bones. Unlike the evils, hope did not rage or corrupt. It lingered, a quiet promise. Hope did not erase the horrors, but it gave mortals the strength to endure them. Farmers sowed seeds in battle-scarred fields. Mothers cradled feverish children, murmuring, "Tomorrow will be better." Lovers clasped hands in the ruins of cities, vowing to rebuild. Though humanity now knew suffering, they also discovered resilience. Zeus's revenge was complete. He had cursed mortals with eternal strife, but in his arrogance he'd overlooked hope, a spark no god could extinguish. Pandora and Epimetheus wandered the fractured world, their hearts heavy with guilt. Yet wherever they travelled, hope followed. They saw it in the first green shoots after a wildfire, in the shared bread between enemies, and in the lullabies sung over fresh graves. One night, as Pandora wept beneath an ancient olive tree, Prometheus, still chained to a cliff for his defiance, spoke to her in a dream. "Do not mourn," he said. "You were Zeus's pawn, but hope is your triumph. Mortals now possess the gift I sought to give them, the power to choose, to surrender or to strive, to hate or to heal." When Pandora awoke, she planted the olive branch from her dream into the cracked soil. It grew into a tree that bore fruit even in drought, a testament to perseverance. Pandora's story teaches that curiosity and suffering are inseparable threads of the human experience. The gods crafted Pandora to punish mortals, yet her act of opening the jar revealed a truth even Zeus could not foresee. Hope is the antidote to despair. The evils she unleashed, sickness, greed, and sorrow, are the price of free will, but hope is the compass that guides us through darkness. The myth reminds us that humanity's greatest strength lies not in avoiding pain, but in choosing to rise above it. Though we cannot undo our mistakes or erase suffering, we can always cling to hope, the quiet, stubborn flame that whispers, "Begin again." The Stonecutter's Lesson, a tale of enough. In a quiet valley nestled between jagged mountains, where the air smelled of pine and the rivers sang as they carved through stone, there lived a humble stonecutter. His days were spent chiseling rocks from dawn until dusk, shaping them into blocks for temples and homes. His hands were calloused, his back bent from labour, and his brow forever glistening with sweat. Though his work fed his family, he often paused to gaze at the mist-shrouded peaks above, wondering what it might be like to live without the weight of the hammer, the ache of the grind. One morning, as he hacked at a stubborn slab of granite, a wealthy merchant passed by on the mountain path. The man rode in a silk-draped palanquin, carried by servants, his robes embroidered with threads of gold. The stonecutter watched, transfixed, as the merchant yawned and tossed a handful of coins to a beggar without a second glance. If only I were rich, the stonecutter thought, his chest tightening with longing. Then I'd know peace. Then I'd want for nothing. Unbeknownst to him, the spirit of the mountain had heard his wish. It was an ancient force, as patient as the rocks themselves, and it stirred in the depths of the earth. That night, as the stonecutter slept on his straw mat, the spirit's voice rumbled through his dreams, not in words, but in a sensation, a warmth that seeped into his bones. When he awoke, his hut was gone. In its place stood a mansion of marble and jade, its halls filled with treasures, its tables groaning under feasts of spiced meats and honeyed fruits. Servants bowed as he walked by, and silk robes replaced his tattered tunic. For days the stonecutter revelled in his new life. He lounged in gardens where fountains sparkled, sampled delicacies from distant lands, and laughed as musicians played just for him. But soon restlessness crept in. One afternoon he stood on his balcony and watched a king's procession wind through the valley. Soldiers in polished armour marched ahead, their banners fluttering, while the king himself sat atop an elephant adorned with rubies. The crowd knelt as he passed, their cheers shaking the earth. What good is wealth without power? The stonecutter thought. If I were king, no one would ever ignore me again. The mountain spirit listened. By morning, the stonecutter sat on a golden throne in a palace greater than any he'd imagined. Courts of nobles grovelled at his feet, and armies awaited his command. He ordered feasts and festivals, statues erected in his honour, and laws rewritten to his whims. Yet the more he demanded, the heavier the crown felt. One sweltering day, as he reviewed his troops under a blazing sun, sweat drenched his robes, and his throat burned with thirst. He glared at the sky. The sun is greater than I am. It rules the heavens. If only I could command its power. The spirit obliged. The stonecutter's body dissolved into light, and he became the sun itself, blazing with fury. He scorched fields, dried rivers, and forced farmers to shield their eyes. But as he relished his might, a thick blanket of clouds smothered his rays, plunging the land into shadow. Enraged, he strained to burn through them, but the clouds only thickened. If I were a storm, he roared silently, I'd tear the sky apart. In an instant, he was the storm. Thunder boomed in his voice, rain lashed like whips. He flooded valleys, uprooted trees, and sent villagers fleeing. But when his winds died down, he noticed the mountain. His mountain, standing unshaken, its peaks piercing the clouds. Nothing can defeat the mountain, he seethed. If I were the mountain, I'd be invincible. The spirit answered. The stonecutter's essence merged with the earth, his body becoming stone, his roots plunging deep into the soil. Seasons passed. Snow dusted his slopes. Eagles nested on his ridges. He felt powerful, eternal, until one day a faint tap-tap-tap echoed through his core. Peering down, he saw a man chiseling rocks at his base. A stonecutter, humming as he worked, his face content beneath a dusty hat. The mountain trembled with realization. The stonecutter's tools, though small, were shaping him. The very role he'd once scorned held a quiet power he'd never understood. In that moment, he longed for the simplicity of his old life, the rhythm of the hammer, the satisfaction of a day's work, the warmth of his family's fire. The mountain spirit, sensing his remorse, gently unravelled the magic. The stonecutter awoke on his straw mat, the first light of dawn filtering through his hut's small window. His hands were rough, his back sore, but his heart felt lighter than it had in years. He walked outside, breathed in the crisp mountain air, and picked up his hammer. From that day on, he worked without resentment. When the merchant's palanquin passed, he nodded politely. When the king's procession shook the valley, he admired its splendour but kept chiselling. He noticed things he'd once ignored. The way sunlight gilded the rocks at sunset, the laughter of his children as they played in the quarry, the gratitude in a neighbour's eyes when he helped mend a wall. Years later, when travellers asked the old stonecutter the secret to his contentment, he simply smiled and pointed to the mountain. "I spent a lifetime chasing what I thought I lacked," he said, "only to learn that the world gives us exactly what we need. The sun has its fire, the storm its rage, the mountain its might, but I have this." He lifted his hammer, its handle worn smooth by time, and it is enough. The mountain spirit, silent and eternal, seemed to nod in approval. For the stonecutter had finally understood. True peace is not found in becoming more, but in embracing what you already are. The stonecutter's journey teaches us that chasing what others have, wealth, power, status, only leads to emptiness. His longing to be more blinded him to the beauty of being enough. The mountain, sun, and storm seemed mighty, but their power came with burdens he never imagined. True contentment isn't found in becoming something else. It's found in embracing who you already are. The story whispers a timeless truth. Comparison is a thief. When we fixate on what we lack, we miss the gifts already in our hands, the rhythm of meaningful work, the warmth of love, the quiet pride of a life lived with purpose. The stonecutter's hammer, once a symbol of hardship, became his greatest teacher. It reminded him that strength isn't measured by what we conquer, but by what we cherish. Like the mountain, we all have roots. Some are visible, our skills, our roles, our daily contributions. Others are hidden, our capacity for gratitude, our resilience, our ability to find joy in simplicity. The world will always show us glittering illusions of more, but peace blooms when we stop reaching and start seeing. Enough isn't a destination. It's a choice to honour the life we've built, stone by stone, and to recognise that the ordinary is extraordinary in its own light. The Starfish Thrower, a tale of small acts. The morning after a violent storm, the beach lay littered with starfish. Thousands of them dotted the sand, their spiny arms curled inward, their colours fading under the harsh sun. The tide had retreated far beyond the horizon, leaving them stranded, their gills gasping for the ocean's embrace. Waves of heat shimmered above the shore, and the air smelled of salt and decay. To most, it seemed a hopeless scene, a graveyard of creatures too numerous to save. But one child saw it differently. She had come to the beach with her father, a fisherman mending his nets in the shade of a duneside shack. While he worked, she wandered, her bare feet sinking into the damp sand. When she spotted the first starfish, she knelt, tilting her head. Its body was leathery, one arm torn, but its underside still pulsed faintly, a heartbeat in the open air. Without hesitation, she scooped it up, carried it to the water's edge, and tossed it into the surf. The starfish vanished beneath a foam-capped wave. She turned back to the beach, scanning the shore. There were hundreds more, maybe thousands, stretching as far as she could see. For a moment, she stood still, her small shoulders slumping. Then she bent down, picked up another, and began to walk. Her father noticed her movements first. He paused, a net draped over his knee, and watched as she trekked back and forth between the dunes and the sea. Each trip took minutes, plucking a starfish from the sand, cradling it in her palms, wading into the shallows to release it. Her dress grew heavy with salt water, her hair tangled in the wind, but she didn't stop. Eventually, a stranger approached. He was an older man, his face lined by years, squinting at horizons, his boots crusted with mud from the docks. He'd come to assess the storm's damage, to tally losses for the fishing guild. When he saw the girl, he frowned. For a long time, he stood at a distance, arms crossed, watching her labor. Finally, he strode over, his shadow falling across her path as she reached for another starfish. "You're wasting your time," he said, though not unkindly. "Look around, there are too many. You can't save them all. What difference does it make?" The girl paused, her fingers hovering above the starfish. Its body was brittle now, baking in the sun. She lifted it gently, turned, and waded into the waves. The water soaked her knees as she leaned down, letting the current carry the creature from her hands. When she turned back, her eyes met the man's. Without a word, she pointed to the sea, where the starfish had vanished beneath the surface. The man opened his mouth, closed it, and looked away. He walked off, shaking his head, but the girl's gesture lingered in his mind. Hours later, as he boarded his boat, he glanced back at the shore. The girl was still there, a small figure moving steadily under the vast sky. By dusk, her father called her home. The beach was far from empty, but a narrow strip of sand near the waterline gleamed clean. Every starfish returned to the sea. Exhausted, the girl trudged up the dunes, her feet dragging. Her father wrapped her in a blanket and carried her to bed, her arms looped around his neck. That night, the tide returned. Waves swept over the shore, reclaiming the remaining starfish, spiriting them back to the depths. By dawn, the beach was pristine, no trace of the storm's wrath. But the girl's actions rippled beyond that day. The stranger, the skeptical man, returned to the docks with a story. He told his crewmates about the child, her quiet determination, the strip of sand she'd cleared. Some laughed, others paused, their hands stilling on their ropes and hooks. The next storm stranded starfish again. This time, the man brought his granddaughter to the beach. Together, they tossed starfish into the surf. Nearby, a young fisherman joined them, then an elderly woman, then two brothers dragging a bucket. No one saved them all, but no one left empty-handed. Years passed. The girl grew into a woman, but she never forgot the lesson of the starfish. When floods ravaged her town, she organized neighbors to sandbag homes. When sickness spread, she delivered broth to the bedridden. She didn't cure everyone, didn't stop every disaster. But for those she reached, the difference was life itself. The man, now grey and bent, often sat on the docks, retelling the story to wide-eyed children. People will tell you that small acts don't matter, he'd say, but they're wrong. The world is changed by tiny hands doing what they can, one starfish at a time. This story is a quiet anthem for the power of small acts. The starfish, like so many problems in life, seemed too numerous to tackle. The girl could have walked away, resigned to the scale of the task. Instead, she chose to save what she could, understanding that enough is not about fixing everything. It's about doing something. The man's skepticism mirrors our own doubts. How often do we hesitate to help because we can't solve the whole problem? How many times have we thought, what's the point? This tale reminds us that the point is not in the numbers, but in the act itself. Every starfish tossed back, every hand extended, every kindness offered, no matter how minor it seems, alters the world in ways we may never see. The girl didn't work alone forever. Her persistence became a beacon, inspiring others to join her. Small acts, when multiplied, create waves. They remind us that we are not powerless, that our choices matter, and that hope is built not by grand gestures, but by countless ordinary hands doing what they can. In a world that often measures success by scale, the Starfish Thrower's legacy whispers, "Start where you are. Use what you have. Save who you can. For even the smallest light pierces darkness, and every starfish returned to the sea is a life reclaimed." The story of Rama and Sita, a journey of love, courage, and light. Long ago, in a land of ancient forests and golden cities, there lived a prince named Rama. He was loved by all for his kindness, wisdom, and strength. His wife Sita was just as remarkable, a woman of grace, intelligence, and unshakable courage. Their story is not just a tale of heroes and demons, but a timeless lesson about love, loyalty, and the triumph of light over darkness. Rama was born into a royal family in the kingdom of Ayodhya, a place of towering palaces and bustling markets, where the streets rang with laughter and the scent of jasmine filled the air. His father, King Dasharatha, ruled with fairness, and the people thrived under his care. Rama was the eldest of 4 brothers, and from a young age he showed a deep sense of duty. He trained in archery, studied sacred texts, and treated everyone with respect, from the poorest farmer to the wealthiest noble. When Rama came of age, he travelled to a neighbouring kingdom to compete in a contest to win Sita's hand in marriage. Sita was no ordinary princess. She was the adopted daughter of King Janaka, a ruler known for his devotion to justice, and she was said to have emerged from the earth itself, a gift from the gods. To marry her, a suitor had to string a mighty bow that no man could lift. Many princes tried and failed, but when Rama approached the bow, he not only lifted it with ease, but drew the string so forcefully that the bow snapped in two. Sita, who had watched silently from a balcony, placed a garland of flowers around Rama's neck, and their bond was sealed. For years, Rama and Sita lived happily in Ayodhya, but peace was not to last. King Dasharatha, growing old, decided to step down and name Rama as his successor. The entire kingdom rejoiced until a shadow fell over the palace. One of Dasharatha's wives, influenced by an old promise the king had made years earlier, demanded that her son, Bharata, be crowned king instead, and that Rama be exiled to the forest for 14 years. Heartbroken but bound by duty, Rama accepted his fate without complaint. Sita, refusing to be parted from him, insisted on joining him, as did Rama's loyal brother, Lakshmana. The 3 left Ayodhya in simple clothes, their heads held high as the people wept. Life in the forest was harsh but peaceful. Rama, Sita, and Lakshmana built a small hut near a river, living off the land and finding joy in the beauty of nature. They befriended wise sages and learned the secrets of the wilderness. But danger lurked in the shadows. Far across the ocean, on the island of Lanka, ruled a powerful demon king named Ravana. He was a complex figure, a scholar and a warrior, but consumed by pride and desire. When he heard of Sita's unmatched beauty, he became obsessed with possessing her. One day, while Rama and Lakshmana were hunting, Ravana disguised himself as a wandering holy man and approached Sita. She welcomed him kindly, offering food and water. But when she stepped closer to serve him, Ravana revealed his true form, a 10-headed giant with eyes like burning coals. He seized Sita and carried her away in his flying chariot, soaring high above the treetops as she cried out for help. When Rama and Lakshmana returned to find their home destroyed and Sita gone, Rama collapsed in grief. His hands trembled, his heart shattered, but deep inside, a fire began to burn, a resolve to bring Sita home, no matter the cost. Rama's journey to rescue Sita became a quest that tested every part of his soul. He and Lakshmana wandered through dense jungles, crossed raging rivers, and climbed treacherous mountains, following clues left by kind animals and wise hermits. Along the way, they met Hanuman, the leader of a tribe of monkey warriors. Hanuman was no ordinary monkey. He possessed immense strength, the ability to leap across oceans, and a heart full of devotion. When he heard Rama's story, he pledged his loyalty, rallying his people to join the search. The monkeys scoured the earth, and Hanuman eventually discovered Sita imprisoned in Lanka, guarded by demons in Ravana's glittering palace. She sat beneath a tree in a garden, her face pale, but her spirit unbroken. She had refused Ravana's demands to marry him, clinging to her faith in Rama. Hanuman comforted her, showing her Rama's ring as proof of his loyalty, and promised she would be saved. To reach Lanka, Rama needed an army. The monkeys built a bridge of stones and logs across the ocean, a marvel of teamwork and hope. When the bridge was complete, Rama led his allies across the waves, their hearts pounding with determination. The battle that followed was fierce. Ravana's forces were vast. Monsters with claws like swords, warriors who breathed fire, and illusions designed to confuse. But Rama fought with the strength of love and justice, his arrows blazing like comets. Lakshmana stood by his side, fearless and loyal, while Hanuman soared through the skies, tearing down towers and rallying the troops. The final showdown between Rama and Ravana shook the heavens. Ravana, armed with magical weapons and protected by ancient spells, seemed invincible. But Rama, guided by wisdom and the blessings of the gods, aimed an arrow tipped with divine light at Ravana's heart. The demon king fell, his pride extinguished, and the battlefield fell silent. When Rama found Sita in the garden, his eyes filled with tears of relief. But their reunion was bittersweet. Sita had endured unimaginable hardship, and some in Rama's camp doubted her purity, whispering that no one could survive Ravana's captivity unscathed. To prove her innocence, Sita stepped into a sacred fire, praying to the gods to protect her if her heart had remained true. Flames roared around her, but when the smoke cleared, she stood unharmed, the fire itself cradling her like a mother. Rama embraced her, his faith in her unshaken. Their return to Ayodhya was a moment of triumph, The people lit lamps in every home, creating a sea of light to guide them, a tradition still celebrated today as Diwali, the festival of lights. Bharata, who had ruled Ayodhya in Rama's absence with humility and care, joyfully returned the throne. Rama became king, ruling with compassion and wisdom, while Sita stood by his side as his equal, her strength and dignity inspiring generations. Yet their story does not end there. Life, even for heroes, is never simple. When whispers about Sita's time in Lanka resurfaced, she chose to return to the earth, her mother, asking it to reclaim her if she had ever been unfaithful. The ground opened gently, and Sita vanished, leaving Rama heartbroken once more. But her legacy endured. She had shown the world that true strength lies not in power, but in integrity, courage, and an unyielding belief in oneself. Rama ruled for many years, his reign a golden age of peace. But he never forgot Sita. In his quiet moments, he would gaze at the horizon, remembering her laughter, her wisdom, and the light she had brought into his life. When his time came, he walked into the Sarayu River, ascending to the heavens, his spirit finally at peace. The story of Rama and Sita is more than an ancient epic. It is a mirror reflecting the struggles and triumphs we all face. It teaches us that love is worth fighting for, that loyalty is the bedrock of trust, and that even in the darkest times, light persists. Ravana's pride destroyed him, but Rama's humility and Sita's resilience became legend. Their journey reminds us that goodness is not about perfection. It is about facing adversity with courage, treating others with kindness, and holding fast to what is right, no matter the cost. In a world where shadows still exist, greed, anger, injustice, their story is a beacon. It tells us that no darkness is eternal, that bridges can be built over impossible divides, and that the smallest lamp lit with hope can guide us home. Ekalavya's Devotion, a tale of courage, sacrifice, and the power of belief. In a time when ancient forests stretched endlessly and kingdoms thrived across vast lands, there lived a boy named Ekalavya. He belonged to the Nishada tribe, a community of hunters and gatherers who lived in harmony with the wilderness. Though the world often overlooked his people, Ekalavya dreamed of greatness. His heart burned with a quiet fire to become the greatest archer the world had ever known. His story is one of unwavering dedication and a loyalty so profound it transcends time, a testament to how belief can both uplift and test the human spirit. Ekalavya's journey began in the heart of the dense woodlands near Hastinapura, where sunlight filtered through towering trees and rivers whispered secrets as they flowed. The Nishadas were masters of the forest, their lives intertwined with the rhythms of nature. From a young age, Ekalavya learned to read the subtle signs of the wilderness, the faint rustle of leaves signaling a deer's approach, the shift in the wind hinting at a coming storm. But while his peers honed their skills in tracking and trapping, Ekalavya's gaze lingered on the horizon, where hawks soared with effortless precision. He imagined their flight as a metaphor for something greater, a life beyond the shadows of the trees. One day, while wandering deep into the woods, Ekalavya stumbled upon a clearing where a group of young princes practiced archery. Their teacher was Drona, a legendary warrior known for his unmatched skill and stern discipline. Drona trained the royal heirs of Hastinapura, including Arjuna, a prince whose talent shone like a blazing star. Ekalavya watched, hidden behind a thicket, as Arjuna released arrow after arrow, each striking the center of a distant target. The teacher's nods of approval and the prince's admiration were unmistakable. In that moment, Ekalavya's purpose crystallized. He would learn from Drona. He would master the bow, not just as a hunter, but as an artist. But when he approached the group, hope glowing in his eyes, the teacher's expression shifted. Ekalavya's rough hands, his simple clothes, and his identity as a tribal boy marked him as an outsider. Drona's duty was to the princes, bound by tradition and caste. With a quiet shake of his head, he turned away, leaving Ekalavya standing alone in the dust. The rejection stung, but it did not extinguish Ekalavya's resolve. If he could not learn beside Drona, he would learn from him in spirit. Returning to the forest, he gathered clay from the riverbank and sculpted a statue of the warrior, a lifelike figure that seemed to breathe with wisdom. He placed it in a secluded grove, surrounded by ancient trees, and knelt before it. In his heart, this statue became his teacher, his guide, his silent mentor. Day after day, Ekalavya returned to the grove. He fashioned a bow from sturdy wood and arrows from reeds and feathers. Mimicking the stances he had glimpsed, he practiced with relentless focus. His hands blistered, his muscles ached, and doubt sometimes clouded his mind. But he refused to yield. When his arrows missed their mark, he retrieved them and tried again. When exhaustion weighed him down, he splashed his face with cool river water and pressed on. The statue stood watch, a silent witness to his transformation from a determined boy to a master of the bow. Years passed. Ekalavya's skill grew until he could perform feats that defied belief. He could strike a single leaf fluttering in the wind, hit a fish's glinting eye beneath choppy water, and split one arrow with another mid-flight. The forest animals became his companions. A fox curled at his feet as he rested, a sparrow perching on his shoulder as he carved arrows. Yet he remained humble, attributing every success to the statue that had guided him. One afternoon, the princes ventured into the forest for a hunt. Their hounds cornered a wild boar, but before Arjuna could draw his bow, 7 arrows pierced the animal in rapid succession, each striking a lethal point. The princes froze, stunned. Such precision surpassed even Arjuna's famed skill. Following the trail of the arrows, they discovered Ekalavya in his grove, bow in hand, the statue of Drona standing vigil. Arjuna's pride turned to bitterness. How could a tribal boy, unaided by formal training, rival his talent? He confronted his teacher, his face a mask of betrayal. Drona, torn between guilt and duty, knew what he must do to honor his promise to Arjuna. Summoning Ekalavya, Drona praised his extraordinary skill, his voice heavy with unspoken regret. He explained that a student's ultimate offering to their teacher was a gift of devotion. Without hesitation, Ekalavya agreed, his loyalty unwavering. When Drona asked for his right thumb, the forest seemed to hold its breath. Without his thumb, Ekalavya could never draw a bow again. His life's work, his identity, his dream, all shattered. Yet his faith in his teacher outweighed the pain. In one swift motion, he severed his thumb and placed it at Drona's feet, his blood soaking the earth. The princes stood in silent shock. Arjuna's triumph felt hollow, his victory tinged with shame. Drona turned away, unable to bear the weight of what he had demanded. But Ekalavya did not falter. He bandaged his hand, bowed to his statue, and retreated into the forest. Though he could no longer shoot, he trained his left hand with the same relentless spirit, adapting his techniques with creativity and grit. He taught his tribe, sharing his knowledge so their arrows would fly true. His story spread far beyond the woods, not as a tale of loss, but as a legend of unbreakable resolve. Years later, when war engulfed the land, Ekalavya fought not with a bow, but with wisdom and leadership. He guided his people through hardship, his presence a symbol of resilience. The Nishadas, once dismissed, grew stronger, their voices rising in unity. The statue of Drona remained in the grove, weathered by seasons but standing firm. Visitors left offerings of flowers and whispered prayers for courage. Some claimed that on still nights they heard the faint hum of an arrow in flight, a reminder that true devotion outlives the body, and that greatness is born not from privilege, but from the courage to believe. Ekalavya's story is a mirror to the soul, reflecting the power of perseverance and the pain of injustice. His journey teaches that dedication can unlock extraordinary potential, but it also reveals the harshness of a world that judges worth by birth rather than merit. Ekalavya's sacrifice, a symbol of loyalty exploited, shows the cost of blind devotion, yet his resilience transforms tragedy into triumph. Even when his dream was shattered, he found new ways to rise, proving that true strength lies in adaptability and the refusal to surrender. His legacy is a beacon for those who face barriers, reminding us that greatness is not bestowed, but earned through grit, humility, and an unyielding belief in oneself. In a world that often overlooks the marginalized, Ekalavya's tale urges us to see beyond labels, to honor the quiet fighters, and to recognize that light often shines brightest in the most unexpected places. The Myth of Icarus, a tale of wings, ambition, and the light that burns. Long ago, in a world where the sea sparkled like crushed sapphires and the sun painted the sky in gold, there lived a young boy named Icarus. His story is one of soaring dreams and tragic lessons, a reminder that even the brightest flames can cast the darkest shadows. It begins on the island of Crete, a land of labyrinthine palaces and towering cliffs, where the boy and his father, Daedalus, were trapped by the wrath of a king. Daedalus was a man of extraordinary skill, an inventor whose mind danced with ideas that defied the ordinary. He had crafted wonders for kings and gods, mechanical birds that sang, statues that seemed to breathe, and the infamous labyrinth, a maze so twisted it imprisoned a monstrous beast. But when King Minos of Crete feared Daedalus might share the labyrinth's secrets, he imprisoned the inventor and his son in a tower high above the sea. The tower had no doors, no stairs, only narrow windows that framed the endless horizon. For years, father and son watched the gulls glide on the wind, their wings slicing through the salty air. Icarus dreamed of freedom, his eyes tracing the birds' paths as they vanished into the clouds. Daedalus, too, longed to escape, but his brilliance was a double-edged sword. He knew the king's ships guarded every shore, and the sea was a vast, unforgiving ally. Yet, as the days turned to months, an idea took root, a plan as daring as it was dangerous. Using feathers shed by seabirds, threads from their own clothes, and wax from the tower's candles, Daedalus crafted 2 pairs of wings. They were fragile but magnificent, each feather aligned with precision. The wax softened and moulded to hold them together. He fastened the wings to their arms with leather straps, his hands trembling with hope and fear. "These wings are not toys," he warned Icarus, his voice heavy with urgency. The boy nodded, his heart racing as he stretched his arms, feeling the weight of the feathers. "Fly too close to the sea, and the water will soak the wings, dragging you down," Daedalus explained. "Fly too close to the sun, and the wax will melt. Stay close to me. Follow my path." At dawn, they leaped from the tower window. For a moment, the world fell away, and Icarus felt a rush of terror, then joy. The wind cradled him, the wings humming as they caught the air. Below, the island shrank to a speck, the sea a shimmering tapestry. Daedalus flew ahead, steady and cautious, his movements measured. But Icarus, drunk on the thrill of flight, began to swoop and dive, laughing as the clouds kissed his face. The sun climbed higher, its warmth turning fierce. Daedalus glanced back, shouting for his son to stay low. But Icarus no longer heard him. The boy's eyes were fixed upward, where the sky burned brilliant and boundless. He soared higher, each beat of his wings carrying him closer to the sun. The wax softened, glistening like honey. A feather loosened, then another. Panic flashed in Icarus's chest as the wings began to unravel. He flapped harder, but the heat was relentless. Feathers spiraled away, and the straps snapped. The fall was swift. Daedalus, miles ahead, turned at the sound of his son's cry, a single shattered word lost to the wind. By the time he reached the spot, only feathers floated on the waves. The sea had claimed Icarus, leaving no trace but a memory. Daedalus buried his son on a lonely island, his hands raw from digging, his heart a hollow echo. He hung the broken wings in a temple, a silent offering to the gods he no longer trusted. Some say he never flew again, wandering the earth until his grief turned him to dust. But the story does not end there. The sea where Icarus fell was named the Icarian Sea, its waters forever whispering his name. Fishermen speak of a strange light that dances on the waves at midday, a glimmer that fades if you chase it, a reminder that some dreams, like the sun, are meant to guide us, not to be held. Icarus's story is a mirror held to the human soul. It teaches us that ambition, like fire, can warm or destroy. His wings were not his downfall. It was his refusal to see that freedom and folly often share the same sky. The myth whispers a truth we all must learn. Limits are not chains. They are the lines that keep us whole, the guardians of our fragile hopes. Daedalus, too, carries a lesson. His genius built the wings, but his love could not steer them. In his grief, we see the cost of creation, the weight of knowing that every gift, every leap of faith carries risk. Yet, without those risks, there is no flight. The tale asks us to balance, to reach for the light, but respect its heat, to cherish the wind, but anchor ourselves to wisdom. For in the end, the sun is not our enemy. It is our compass, reminding us that even the highest dreams must bow to the laws of earth and sky. The Story of Narcissus, a reflection on beauty, vanity, and the power of self-love. Long ago, in a world where rivers sang secrets to the wind and mountains cradled the clouds, there lived a young man named Narcissus. He was born with a beauty so rare that even the flowers turned their faces toward him as he passed. His golden hair shone like sunlight, his eyes mirrored the sky, and his smile could soften the hardest heart. But Narcissus carried a heavy burden, his own reflection. His story is not just a warning about vanity, but a timeless lesson about the delicate balance between self-love and self-obsession. and how the line between admiration and destruction can be as thin as a dewdrop. Narcissus grew up in a valley nestled between emerald hills, where wild flowers painted the meadows and crystal streams carved paths through the earth. From the moment he could walk, people marvelled at his looks. Strangers gifted him honeyed fruits and woven garlands, while friends competed to earn his attention. Yet Narcissus remained distant, his heart locked behind a wall of indifference. He spent hours gazing into still ponds, tracing the curve of his jaw, the arch of his brows, losing himself in the perfection of his own face. To him, no one else compared, not the shepherds who sang ballads at dusk, nor the villagers who praised his grace. His coldness wounded many. A gentle forest spirit named Echo, cursed by the gods to only repeat the words of others, once followed him through the woods, her heart aching with unspoken love. When she tried to call his name, her voice echoed his own phrases back to him. Annoyed, Narcissus pushed her away, leaving her to fade into the trees, her form dissolving into whispers on the breeze. Others, too, faced his rejection. A poet who wrote verses about his eyes, a dancer who spun tales with her feet, all left with empty hands and broken hearts. One day, a traveller who had been scorned by Narcissus prayed to the gods for justice. The plea reached Nemesis, the keeper of balance, who decided it was time to teach the young man a lesson. She led him to a hidden pool deep in the forest, its waters so still they became a mirror to the soul. When Narcissus knelt to drink, he saw his reflection for the first time in such clarity, every detail flawless, every angle luminous. Enthralled, he reached out to touch the face in the water, but ripples scattered the image. Panicked, he froze, waiting for the surface to calm. Hours slipped into days. Narcissus remained by the pool, refusing food or rest, consumed by the illusion in the water. He whispered to his reflection, believing it to be a kindred spirit trapped beneath the surface. "Why do you flee when I reach for you?" he murmured, unaware he spoke to himself. His cheeks hollowed, his golden hair dulled, and his hands grew frail, but he could not look away. The boy who had once disdained the world now longed for a love he could never grasp, a love that existed only in his own image. The forest watched in sorrow. Birds brought him berries, but he ignored them. The wind tried to nudge him from the pool, but he brushed it aside. Even the gods pitied him, though they knew his fate was sealed. As his strength faded, Narcissus finally understood the truth. The face he adored was his own, and his obsession had become a prison. With his last breath he begged forgiveness for his pride, a single tear slipping into the water. Where his body lay, a flower bloomed, a delicate blossom with white petals and a golden centre, its face forever bowed toward its reflection in the water. The villagers named it the Narcissus, a reminder of the boy who lost himself to his own beauty. But the story does not end there. Echo, though reduced to a voice, lingered in the hills, her sighs blending with the wind. On quiet days, visitors to the pool swear they hear her repeating Narcissus's final words, a haunting refrain, "Love yourself, but never alone." The tale of Narcissus is a mirror held to the human soul. It teaches us that beauty, though captivating, is fleeting, a gift to be shared, not hoarded. Narcissus's tragedy was not his appearance, but his inability to see beyond it. His self-obsession blinded him to the warmth of connection, the joy of giving, and the truth that love cannot thrive in isolation. The flower that bears his name carries a silent warning. when we fixate too deeply on our own reflection, whether in water, in screens, or in the eyes of admirers, we risk losing sight of the world around us. True self-love is not about admiration, but balance. It is about nurturing kindness inward and outward, recognizing that our worth grows when we root ourselves in humility and empathy. Narcissus's pool still exists in hidden corners of the earth, its waters calm and clear. To gaze into it is to ask ourselves, do we see only a face, or do we see a heart? Do we love ourselves with the world, or instead of it? The answer, like the narcissus flower, blooms where light meets water, a fragile, beautiful reminder to look up, reach out, and let love flow beyond the edges of our own reflection. Thor and the Giants, a story of strength, pride, and the lessons we learn. Long ago, in a world where gods walked among mortals and legends were born from the clash of wills, there lived a warrior named Thor. He was no ordinary man. His power was unmatched, his courage unyielding, and his hammer, a weapon forged in the heart of a dying star, was the symbol of his might. Thor believed himself invincible. But the greatest challenges in life rarely come from the battles we see. They come from the pride we carry within. The story begins on a cold, grey morning when Thor awoke to find his hammer missing. Panic surged through him like a wildfire. Without it, he felt stripped of his identity, his hands empty and his heart pounding. The hammer was more than a weapon. It was the source of his strength, the protector of his home, and the barrier between his people and the giants, ancient towering beings who craved chaos. Giants were not just enemies. They were cunning, ruthless, and masters of deception. Thor knew that if they had his hammer, the delicate balance of the world would crumble. Desperation drove him to seek help from Loki, a man known for his sharp mind and slippery loyalties. Loki was not a friend, but he was clever, and Thor had no choice. Together, they devised a plan. Using a magical cloak borrowed from Freya, a woman of wisdom and foresight, Loki transformed into a falcon and flew to the frozen wastes where the giants dwelled. What he found there was worse than they feared. Thrym, the king of the giants, had stolen the hammer. His price for its return was Freya herself as his bride. Thor's rage burned hot. The idea of surrendering Freya to the giants was unthinkable. But Loki, ever the strategist, saw another path, one that required humiliation. Thor would disguise himself as Freya, infiltrate the giants' feast, and reclaim his hammer. The plan was absurd, dangerous, and deeply insulting to Thor's pride. Yet he agreed. Pride, he told himself, was a small price to pay for the safety of his home. Dressed in a bridal gown and veil, Thor felt a storm of emotions: anger, shame, determination. The giant's hall was a nightmare of ice and shadows, filled with laughter that echoed like thunder. Thrym, a mountain of muscle and malice, leered at his bride, oblivious to the deception. The feast was a grotesque spectacle. Giants gorged on meat and mead, their voices booming, their eyes glinting with cruelty. Thor's hands trembled under the veil, not from fear, but from the effort of restraint. When the moment came, Thrym lifted the veil to kiss his bride, and froze. Thor's eyes, blazing with fury, gave him away. The hall erupted in chaos. Thor seized his hammer, and the air crackled with lightning. Giants fled, their roars of defiance turning to screams. Walls of ice shattered, and Thrym's reign ended in a single thunderous blow. But victory, Thor soon learned, was fleeting. pride has a way of blinding even the strongest of hearts. Emboldened by his triumph, he vowed to crush every giant who dared threaten his world. With Loki at his side, he journeyed deeper into the frozen lands, his chariot tearing across skies darkened by storm clouds. They came upon a colossal hall, its doors wide enough to swallow mountains. Inside sat Skrymir, a giant whose snores shook the earth. Thor, ever impatient, saw an opportunity to prove his strength. While the giant slept, he struck him 3 times with his hammer, each blow meant to kill. But Skrymir only stirred, muttering about pine cones falling from trees. The giant's indifference was a wound to Thor's pride. Undeterred, Thor pressed onward to Utgard, a fortress ruled by a king known as Utgard Loki. Here, the giant's tricks reached new heights. They challenged Thor to feats of strength, lifting a cat that was secretly a serpent encircling the world, drinking from a horn connected to the ocean, wrestling an old woman who embodied time itself. Each task humiliated him. The cat's paw barely left the ground. The horn's mead seemed endless. The old woman pinned him with ease. Thor's frustration boiled over until the king revealed the truth. The cat was a cosmic beast, the horn drained the seas, and the crone was unstoppable age. The giants had not outmuscled Thor, they had outwitted him. Defeat settled heavily on Thor's shoulders. For the first time, he questioned his reliance on strength alone. Yet pride still flickered in his heart. On a fishing trip with Hymir, a giant whose beard dripped with brine, Thor sought to reclaim his glory. He cast a line baited with the head of Hymir's prized ox into the abyss. What emerged was Jormungandr, the serpent that encircled the world. Their struggle churned the sea into a frenzy, a battle of God versus chaos. But as Thor raised his hammer for the final blow, Hymir cut the line in terror. The serpent vanished, and Thor's triumph slipped away. In the end, Thor returned home with his hammer, his pride scarred but his spirit wiser. He had faced giants, serpents, and illusions, but his greatest enemy had been himself. The giant's cunning had exposed his flaws, arrogance, impulsiveness, a blindness to subtler truths. Strength, he realized, was not just the power to destroy. It was the wisdom to see beyond the surface, the humility to accept limits, and the courage to adapt. The lesson of Thor's journey is timeless. Life rarely bows to brute force. Challenges demand more than muscle. They require patience, cunning, and the willingness to confront our own weaknesses. Thor's hammer could level mountains, but it could not outwit time, outdrink the sea, or outfight fate. True strength lies in balance, the storm and the calm, the fist and the open hand, the pride that drives us, and the humility that grounds us. Thor's story is not just a myth, it is a mirror. We all face giants, doubts, failures, pressures that seem insurmountable. Like Thor, we may cling to what we know, our hammers, our pride. But growth begins when we dare to see the world as it is, not as we wish it to be. Giants fall not by force alone, but by the quiet courage to learn, adapt, and rise again.